Audible Studios presents Faerie Curse, The Changeling Chronicles, Book 5. Written by Emma L. Adams. Performed by Lucy Christian. Chapter 1. Never mess with a witch, I said. My friend Isabel, the witch in question, nodded to me as I set up a tracking spell outside the wide, one-floored building. Once, I'd pretended to be a witch to hide the fact that I'd stolen my magic from a lord of Faerie. I didn't need to lie any longer, but I was still more than happy to act as Isabel's assistant to find out who'd been stealing supplies through the coven's back door. Nobody ever crossed the Laurel Coven and got away with it. That they'd been robbed 3 times in a week was as unlikely as a fairy getting the sudden urge to join the Necromancer Guild. This time, the thieves had even had the nerve to leave graffiti behind. The unreadable words, smudged by rainwater, stood out above my head as I activated the tracking spell. "The thieves struck a couple of hours ago at most," Isabel said. "That means the tracks will be fresh." I nodded. Unless they covered their traces. But if they'd managed to steal from the witch's stores, then they must know how to avoid detection, especially as a significant number of the spells inside the store were used to erase evidence. There were 2 main branches of tracking spell. Those used to track a location, usually a person's, and those which involved looking into what had recently happened in a certain place. With the second version of the spell, I'd get a glimpse at the last person to walk on this particular patch of pavement, except for Isabel and me, of course. One disadvantage to tracking spells was that they played like old movies with no sound. As green glyphs swelled up both my arms, my vision tunneled. For a few seconds, I saw nothing. Then, figures walked out of the door to the warehouse. All 4 wore black and had their hoods pulled up. From their posture and the way they walked, I'd guess they were human. One turned and locked the door, and then they walked away. Damn it. I hadn't expected them to come out wearing name tags, but come on. Hooded figures in black masks. Really helpful for identification, which, of course, was the point. I withdrew my hands from the tracking spell, and the circle collapsed into fine powder. Isabel threw down a cleansing spell which would obliterate our own DNA traces in case anyone else came near. "See anything useful?" I shook my head. Masked people. They didn't use magic. Not fairies, and probably not shifters either. I'd say human. But why, and how, would non-supernaturals, humans without magic, steal supplies from the coven? Only a witch could make a spell. Non-supernaturals couldn't even use one, which at least explained why they hadn't erased their traces. Weird. Definitely weird. "How many?" Isabel paced to the door's side, careful not to tread where I'd put the spell. I saw 4 come out of the door. One of them had a key or something that locked the door again. No signs of how they broke in to begin with. Lockpick? "It's trapped." Isabel pointed to the faintly disguised shadow spells on either side. "I found them disabled, like the last 2 robberies. Whoever our thieves are, they know how to detect and negate spells." So they have a dispeller. The device revealed and negated certain spells, but the only one I'd seen was Vance's, and they weren't easy to come by. Maybe. Or a counterspell. But only someone with magic can use one. Not to mention, if they could do that, they could have thrown a cleansing spell down to erase their traces. Isabel sighed. "I'm going in. Cover for me?" "You sure?" "Nobody's inside. We reset the wards right after we found the break-in." "Okay." My eyes followed the movement as she unlocked the door. The dark, wide room lit up, fluorescent overhead lights casting everything in soft tones. One of my hands rested on the sword strapped to my waist, and I unsheathed it a couple of inches, but no blue glow warned me of fairy magic. Boxes and crates filled most of the space inside, overflowing with spell ingredients of all kinds. I positioned myself so I covered the door, ready to run inside and help if anything went wrong. Though, if an aggressor waited inside a storeroom filled with spells, they'd be in for a nasty surprise if they tried to jump Isabel. My best friend might be mild-mannered, but stealing from the witches' stores was an unforgivable crime. I glanced inside, then knelt to check on the shadow spell hiding the wards at the entrance. Standard security wards, which detected threats and prevented anyone from passing by who wasn't a witch. In fact, they'd gone one step further. I rested my hand over the ward and met an invisible barrier. They'd fixed the ward so nobody aside from a select few, the members of the coven, could walk through without meeting resistance. An iron boundary, also disguised, kept fairies out, and the door itself was reinforced in iron too. I suspected there were other wards hidden under more shadow spells around the immediate area. I didn't wear one myself. Shadow spells didn't work as effectively on me as they used to. My magic was only visible to those with the sight. In other words, anyone with fairy blood. Problem was, to those people, I looked like I'd taken a bath in neon blue glow paint. In other words, stealth was a hell of an issue, especially considering I was fairy bait whether I used my magic or not. On cue, a passing piskie spotted me and let out a high-pitched screech. I stood as still as possible, willing my magic to die down. The glow dimmed, but the fairy had already spotted me. "Shoo!" I muttered, waving a hand. The piskie, naturally, flew towards me, colliding with the barrier on the door. There was a popping noise, and the small creature shot into the air like a cork from a champagne bottle. I winced at the noise. It was mid-June, so it wouldn't get dark for another couple of hours, but nasty things came out to play in the evening. Until last year, I'd slipped by under the radar, killing any rogue fairies out to cause trouble, but never acquiring a reputation that went beyond the relatively insular mercenary guild. Half-fairies didn't stare at me openly as they did now, and the mages hadn't known it was possible for a human to have fairy magic. Even now, only a handful of people knew the full story. My sword's blue-tinged glow warned me of approaching trouble. I rested my hand on the hilt, where glyphs were carved in the fairy language I couldn't normally read. The sword, which I had christened Helena, was a replacement for Irene, my old iron blade. Forged in the fairy realm from one of their ancient trees, this blade was the physical manifestation of the magic I'd stolen from a she-lord. In addition to boosting my speed to levels which would let me keep up with a fairy, the talisman was stronger and sharper than any other blade I'd seen. I was fairly sure it physically couldn't break, too, which was another major bonus in my line of work. Movement in the shadows. I swung my sword to the right in time to decapitate the flame-wielding creature sneaking up on me. Fire imps. They always travelled in packs. The blue glow of my magic, combined with the bright red-blue blood dripping down the side, brought 5 more imps scurrying out, yowling. "Oh, no you don't," I said as they ran for the nearest alley. We were on the brink of witch territory, where it overlapped with the non-supernatural neighbourhood. I wouldn't let anyone fall victim to their pranks. With a quick glance behind me to make sure Isabel wasn't being attacked too, I went after the fire imps. Magic burst from my palm and slammed into all 5 of them at once. I'd toned the attack down, but it sent them flying in all directions. A fireball flew past my head. I deflected it, my magic humming like a blue force field between me and the miniature fae kind. They might be small, but the buggers packed a hell of a magical punch. They'd once skipped past the wards on our flat when my old employer had had them switched off, and set Isabel's flower beds on fire. Apparently not taking the hint, a fire imp leaped into the air. "Evil she!" it shrieked, brandishing a knife the length of its arm. I used my shield to deflect another 2 fireballs and caught the imp on the end of my sword. magic burst through the blade, sending the imp's head flying into the air. Oops. I still hadn't quite got the hang of imposing limits on my magic when something was attacking me. 3 swipes, and I'd taken down all the imps except the last one. Glancing down at the bodies of its falling companions, it glared pure murder at me and threw a fireball at my head. I conjured another shield, knocking the fire imp aside as it swiped at my hand. The knife caught the edge of my finger at the same time as the fireball bounced off the shield. The imp howled, caught in its own fire attack, and I finished it off with a single stab. I grimaced, tossing my hair over my shoulder. I'd tied it back, but blue-tinged fairy blood had splattered it, plus my leather jacket and jeans. I'd perfected the denim and blood look. My lifestyle didn't give many chances to make fashion statements. Luckily, the wound on my hand was shallow. Isabel appeared behind me, raising an eyebrow. "Fairies," I said in explanation. "Of course. I leave you for 5 minutes and you're bleeding in an alley surrounded by bits of dead fairy. Ivy, I think you have issues." "You think?" I wiped my bloody hand on my sleeve. "Find anything in there?" "No." She frowned. "Not a sign. It's bizarre. If the thieves really are humans, non-supernaturals, they'd have left DNA traces. Only a witch would know how to erase them. Or a mage, but the Mage Guild is where half the delivery was bound for in the first place." "It won't be a mage," I said. "Any rival witches in the area?" "No. And people in our coven wouldn't have reason to steal supplies. We're allowed to take as many home as we want to, and we have keys to the storeroom anyway." Her forehead creased. "I'm missing something." "The graffiti." "The what?" I pointed. She squinted at the neon paint. "What am I supposed to be looking at?" "The words. I can't read them, but it's definitely writing. Not our alphabet, though." Isabel turned slowly to face me. "I don't see it." My heart sank into my shoes. "You don't see the writing?" That meant one thing. The writing was glamoured. Fairies were responsible. Isabel's face told me she'd had the same thought. "It might not have been the thieves who left it. There'd be no point in leaving a message for us if we can't read it." Unless it was for me, I couldn't help thinking. I had more enemies than I could count, almost all fairies. But there was no reason whatsoever for the person stealing the witch's supplies to assume I'd wander over here and see the message. I couldn't even read the damn thing. Isabel gave me a concerned look. "Did those fairies who attacked you—" "Nah, they didn't know me," I said. "Must be a coincidence. This time, anyway." "Didn't know you personally? Or didn't know about—" She looked at my sword. "Both. It happens sometimes. Though less often than before. Every half-fairy, at least, knew I was Ivy Lane, fairy killer and wielder of a branch of fairy magic most half-bloods would envy. I had run-ins with fairies almost every day. Most wanted to kill me, or at least cause me a minor inconvenience. Some, like the exiled she-lords and their gods, wanted to burn the world down. But I hadn't met one of those since I'd let one escape nearly 6 months ago." I frowned at the message. Fairies wouldn't steal witch spells. They didn't like any magic except for their own. In fact, of all the supernatural groups, I couldn't think of any who'd have reason to steal from here. The necromancers and mages had arrangements with the local coven, so they received the best spell supplies before they went on sale to the public. Perhaps a little unfair, but the mages shouldered most of the risks when something supernatural went awry. The next largest batch of spells went to the local mercenary guild, though there was too much demand and they often had shortages. It was actually down to some of the changes I'd made since joining the Majors as an unofficial advisor that the mercenaries had more access to spells than before. Not that Larson, their boss, showed a jot of gratitude for it. Shifters were typically distrustful of most spells and didn't frequent the market, which left regular, mundane humans as the most likely suspects. Considering the wards outside had been disabled, they must have had the help of at least one magic user, or someone with witch or mage blood. So there's no DNA traces, no tracker imprint, and no way to identify them, I concluded. I'd say checking the road's probably a waste of time, because other people will have passed by. On second thoughts, nobody ever really comes down here. Worth a try. Isabel used the tracking spell this time, at the corner where the road intersected with the main street to the shopping district. I, meanwhile, pulled a small notebook from my pocket to copy down the odd text. Then I joined Isabel. An expression of concentration crossed her face as the glyphs of the spell overlapped, green light bathing her dark skin. Then she blinked, and the spell vanished. "You're right," she said. "Hooded figures. They came from that way." She pointed. "Not the town." Both of us turned to face the street's opposite side, where a high fence cut through the road. Beyond was a series of warehouses. "You mean they climbed over the fence?" "Unless they looped around the other way." She frowned. "Seems a hell of a weird way to commit a robbery. If they were intent on eliminating traces, they'd have stolen a cleansing spell and used it." I considered this. So they avoided the main road, but didn't have the foresight to know you'd use a tracker. That doesn't sound like someone who knows how witch spells work. Unless they wanted us to see. What did they take? That's the thing. There are some cleansing spells missing, but they didn't steal any others I'd expect of thieves, like cosmetic enhancements or illusions. They mostly took tracking spells, and nothing dangerous. I keep all the explosives at the flat. They didn't touch any of the protective spells, nor the iron boundaries. So you mean to say they robbed the witch's most secure store and didn't steal anything important? Yeah. Isabel shook her head. I can't think why anyone would go to the trouble of stealing trackers. They're all but useless to non-witches. Even if I went with the most paranoid scenario, that the person who'd left the message wanted to find me, they didn't need a tracking spell. Or even a phone book. The Major's Manor was one of the most well-known buildings in town, and the entire magical community knew Vance and I were together by now. Yeah, it definitely didn't make sense. Maybe we should hang out by the market and see if someone brings an unusually large shipment of spells, I said. Just what I was thinking. Her eyes glittered with amusement. It's been a while since we got to experiment in cloak and dagger. But a steely undercurrent to her words betrayed her annoyance. It wasn't every day that Isabel's top-notch, witch-enchanted spells malfunctioned. Anything else? I asked her. Isabel shook her head. No. I'll run through some more tests, but our thief has slipped away again. We turned our backs on the warehouse to walk home. Isabel and I owned a business which specialized in investigations, particularly involving the Faeries. Half our jobs or more came from the Majors, thanks to Vance Colton, head mage and my long-term partner. The rest was made up of independent clients who couldn't afford the Majors' fees. Even with my ex-boss's attempts to sabotage us, Isabel and I had done just fine since I'd quit working for Larson. Thanks to the reputation I carried around with me, everyone looking for help with rogue fairies had flocked over to Isabel and me. My phone went off as we reached our flat, a one-story block on the brink of witch territory. Isabel and I owned the whole building now. Our flat was on the bottom floor, and the offices for our business at the top. I paused to check our own wards were intact, just in case. "Ivy!" yelled Erwin the Pisky, flying out to meet us. "Hey, Erwin, have you seen anyone here?" "No bad fairies?" "Good." He answered the same every day. Isabel and I had long since given up on trying to evict our guest, so we compensated by putting him on guard duty. The Pisky might have less brains than a gnat, but he'd got the hang of keeping an eye out once we'd drilled it into him a few times. It helped to have one of the Fae kind watching for trouble, especially when Isabel was alone here. She didn't have the sight, like I did, and couldn't see through fairy glamour. Isabel knew it wasn't the usual fairies I'd asked him to watch out for. Our many tripwire spells, including plant-eating cacti, were enough to take care of most threats. No, my biggest fear was a fairy would walk past the iron wards like it was nothing. I hadn't seen Fionn, former commander of the Wild Hunt, since he'd disappeared after Calder had woken him up. Fionn had made my powers look like a joke. I'd failed to put him back to rest, which meant he had free run of all the realms, unless he was enjoying freedom in the Grey Vale too much to come back here. My phone went off again. "Vance?" Isabel said questioningly. "Yep." I pulled out my phone. "Date night." "Nice." She opened the flat door, and Erwin flew in ahead, making noises like an out-of-control motorcycle. I turned back to the wards. "Maybe you should put an alerting spell somewhere out in the garden, in case our friend who left the message decides to show himself here." "Good point." She frowned. "These robberies don't make any sense at all." "Tell me about it." I headed to my room to change out of my blood-stained clothes and into something nice, which admittedly had a high chance of acquiring its own set of bloodstains by the night's end. Trying to get on with life with fairies around didn't come without its challenges. Once I'd changed, I left the flat for my second home, the manor belonging to the Mage Guild, and the property of Lord Vance Colton. Chapter 2. I hovered in mid-air, pinned in position by a ferocious air current. I'd made the mistake of leaving a gap in my magical shield, and Vance levitated me 10 feet off the ground. The Mage Lord grinned up at me. "Do you give up yet?" "Hell no." I needed to get this right. Otherwise, it was a long fall back to the ground, and even the lawn wouldn't cushion me. Vance's ability, which enabled him to manipulate the laws of physics and displace anything, including air, required absolute control. In other words, if he let go, bye-bye, Ivy. Luckily, I had a trick or two of my own. The manor's sprawling lawns ran all the way to an abandoned sports field at the far end, damp with the early summer rain from last night. The flower beds were in bloom, and the air was filled with fragrant smells and buzzing insects. I dragged myself out of bed early when Vance asked me if I wanted to join him for magical training, but Drake and Wanda had yet to show up. I was the exact opposite of a morning person, but sparring with Vance had forced me to wake up or else get buried headfirst in the hedge. Magic formed a faint blue shield around me. The shield expanded, pushing against Vance's ability. He frowned up at me, as though trying to figure out what I was doing. Improvising was the honest answer. We'd devised this particular magical test after I'd explained how stupid I'd felt fighting ghosts in death, which didn't obey the usual dimensions. Being levitated was the closest I got in this realm. I took a deep breath, then gave one final push with my shield. Vance's hands fell to his sides. The air stopped holding me up, and I dropped like a stone. Or I would have if I hadn't angled myself so I'd fall forward as the wind current hit me from behind. I fell smack into Vance, tackling him to the ground. He wasn't easy to knock over, but he hadn't expected an ivy-shaped bullet to hit him from 10 feet in the air. We slammed into the lawn, my knees resting on his chest. He moved to throw me off him, but I directed another wave of magic at his hands, pinning them behind his head. "Give up, Lord Colton?" "You're stronger." Approval resounded in his voice. "Only you could take me trouncing you as a compliment. Maybe you're just growing soft." Lightning quick, he wrenched one arm free. "I wouldn't be so sure." I'd asked for it. Sure enough, Vance's hand shot out and flipped me over. He landed on top of me, driving the breath from my lungs. I punched him in the shoulder. To no effect. He laughed. "Damn you! If you were a fairy, I'd run you through." I twitched my pinned hand and mimed stabbing him in the chest. He kept laughing at me. I punched him instead. My fist bounced off hard muscle. Ow! I flexed my throbbing hand and allowed the tiniest bit of magic to flow over my skin, forming a shield between me and Vance. "Don't think I can't see what you're doing," Vance said. "Never said you couldn't." I shoved him away from me, using the magic as a shield to shove him away. He landed on his feet, naturally. In Faerie and as a mercenary, I'd fought for survival. Anyone was a potential enemy, and I learned to strike hard and fast before the enemy got the upper hand. But I was always up against people of the same skill level, who fought to stay 1 inch above starvation and keep a roof over their heads. Even the Fae kind living here were weakened shells of their counterparts in the fairy realm. Fighting to stay alive wouldn't help me against a she-lord who could level buildings with a single touch. They killed for pleasure, because humans were nothing but ants to them. I'd need to be better than an average human. Having a badass sword and very quick instincts when I used magic helped, but I'd still been knocked into the ground the last time I'd fought against an overpowered fairy. Considering my enemies had had literally centuries more training than I did, I needed every possible advantage. Mages, on the other hand, dueled for fun as much as survival, being the first group of people to recover from the shock of the post-fairy invasion and rebuild civilization. I'd been surprised how much I could learn from them. Not that I made a habit of stroking Vance's ego by actually telling him that. "Ow!" I said, landing flat on my back as he displaced the air. "Need a hand?" He reached out. I narrowed my eyes in suspicion. "Nice try." I pulled my shield up as he attempted to hit me with another displaced air attack from behind. Really, I didn't need multiple opponents when Vance faced me. Unlike some other mages, Vance didn't rely on his magic. His powers came with limits, so he compensated by being equally good at swordplay and hand-to-hand if he was without his ability, or went up against an opponent with equal magical power. I managed to fend off his attacks until I was within striking range, pulling magic into a shield around me, a shield nobody without the sight could see. Then I let go of the shield. It turned into twin streams of energy, flowing from my palms to Vance. He blocked one attack, only for the second to knock into him from behind. He caught himself before he fell forward. "That was supposed to knock you on your face, damn it!" I still had difficulty judging how much force to apply. I usually underestimated it in training, reluctant to risk hurting anyone. In battle with fairies, I could blast enemies to pieces with the force of that power. "Let's assume it did, if I were a fairy." He stretched, giving me an appealing view of the defined muscles of his chest through his t-shirt. For a human, he was pretty close to the natural athletic grace of a fairy, but in fairness, he worked hard for it. I jumped to my feet. "If you were a fairy, you wouldn't be walking." Vance's phone appeared in his hand from where he'd left it on the table up on the patio. "I also wouldn't be babysitting the necromancers again." "Again? What is it this time?" "Minor spell backfiring. They need a witch to keep an eye on them, if you ask me. Half of them can't do basic spell work, and the ones who can get everything spectacularly wrong." "It wasn't a ghost, was it?" "No, it wasn't." I heard the hidden meaning behind the words. There aren't any ghosts anymore. You're safe. After I'd wiped Calder's memory, the disturbances in the Vale had sent every ghost in town past the gates of death. I'd done such a thorough job, the necromancers would be out of work if not for the ever-present undead. Nothing short of the apocalypse would stop amateurs trying to raise zombies. Since the necromancer's leader, Lord Evander, had been killed in a ritual summoning, nobody had stepped in to take his place. The Mage Council had taken control, which was probably for the best, but it was frustrating when they insisted on calling Vance over the most minor issue. "Do you want me to come with you?"
"I'll only be 10 minutes or so,"
said Vance.
"We can pick it up later."
"Yeah, you're not off the hook yet." 6 months ago, I'd have laughed if anyone told me the sight of the Mage Lord's smile would send happy tingles through my whole body. I'd hated and despised the mages for abandoning me when I'd shown up on their doorstep after my return from Faerie. At first, he'd thought I was a troublemaker conspiring against him. I'd thought he was an interfering, stuck-up mage who insisted on making my life as difficult for me as humanly possible. Then the fairies had attacked both of us. Several narrow brushes with death and a few misunderstandings later, and we had the kind of stability I never thought I'd ever have in a relationship.
"There he is,"
Vance said, indicating Drake. The fire mage walked out the back doors, accompanied by Wanda, Vance's frost mage assistant. Beside her was Lady Harper. Oh, great. Vance approached Lady Harper.
"I've been called to the Necromancy Guild, but Ivy and I plan to train with Drake and Wanda."
"Oh, I'm game," said Drake with a grin. Though I noticed he kept his distance from the sturdy old woman who walked alongside Wanda. Lady Harper didn't like me much, to say the least. The former Mage Lord and Vance's mentor had left the manor not long after the last Vale incident. I hadn't seen her since January, when she'd humiliated me and as good as said I didn't deserve to stand alongside the mages. "Lady Harper," I said, putting on the excessively polite voice I used for council meetings. I'd picked up some things after spending so much time around the Mage Lords. "Nice to see you. And you, Wanda. Ready?" "As I'll ever be." Wanda moved towards the field, as did Drake. She looked a little nervous, probably because Lady Harper had planted herself in one of the deck chairs on the patio, and looked as though she had every intention of watching. Great.
"I'd like to speak to you when you return, Mage Lord," said Lady Harper. "If you like."
He disappeared. Literally. Vance made dramatic look like an understatement. Drake approached the lawn, flicking a fireball between his hands. His coppery hair stood on end, and he still wore his coat, indicating he'd just come back from patrolling. Vance had tripled the manor's guards since the incident a few months ago, when a ghost got inside the house undetected. Wanda smiled at me. She was a frost mage apprentice, but rarely used her talent outside of training. Her main job was as Vance's assistant. Mages ranged from elementals to kinetics, from empaths to people like Vance, who could displace and move objects around. Most had only one ability. Lady Harper was a breaker, which by Vance's definition meant she could control and influence thoughts, like paralyzing my whole body or extracting a memory. Lucky she'd never done that to me, though the formal council member Lord Carlisle had been forced to go through her interrogations to prove that he hadn't known a ghost was possessing him.
"What are we doing this time?"
Drake asked. "The usual. Just give me everything you've got."
"You might live to regret that request."
Within 10 seconds, I was running for my life. Half the lawn blazed with flames, which sent Wanda scurrying away. My magic shielded me, but couldn't douse fire. I glared at Drake over my shoulder. "I'm not a freaking fire extinguisher!" But you're fun to watch. I flipped him off and sent a wave of magic towards him. The fire wavered, the grass rippling in the breeze kicked up by my magical assault. Thanks to many hours practicing, I could now hold up a shield with one hand while simultaneously going on the offensive with the other. My magic was essentially energy, which I could do whatever I liked with, depending on how much force I applied. The shield I'd conjured around my body kept the flames from licking at my skin, but I couldn't put the fire out, just retaliate by throwing handfuls of magical energy back at him while running across the lawn to avoid the flames. Wait. I had an idea. I spun around to face the encroaching fire and aimed my attack at the flaming grass. The fire shot backwards towards its owner. Ha! Drake jumped, forced to dance comically to avoid his own flames. He'd said they didn't burn him, but his shoes might catch on fire. Too late to save the grass, though. I shot another handful of energy at the fire, and it moved again and again until Drake was backed up against the hedge, unable to move without setting that on fire too. Wanda doubled over in silent laughter at Drake's predicament. I'd been a little overenthusiastic, and Drake was surrounded by a wall of rippling flame. "Put it out!" "Vance isn't here to displace the fire this time," I said. "Anyone have a hosepipe?" Wanda threw handfuls of her frost magic, but the fire burned on. Oops. A torrent of water descended from overhead, drenching us all. I spat out hair that had come loose from my ponytail, looking for the source of the unexpected downpour. Lady Harper stood glowering at us. "I called the Mage Lord. He won't be happy when he comes back." "What did he do? Displace half the canal over here?" By the taste of the water, I'd say so anyway. I spat out another mouthful, while Drake lay in a bedraggled pile of red hair and cloak. "That was uncalled for, Vance," he croaked. "He isn't here," said Wanda, shaking water out of her shoes. "I haven't seen you start a fire that intense in years." "Vance is the one who told me to practice." Drake discarded his coat and began squeezing water out of it. "Anyone would think the She were on the brink of another invasion, the way he's driving us." I froze. His comment was unintentionally close to the truth. Vance had only told a handful of people that Fionn knew about the Majors, and had been partially, if not entirely, responsible for the invasion. "What's the deal with the She, then?" asked Drake, sitting on the end of the patio to continue squeezing water from his coat. "What makes them so special?" I sat next to him, shaking water out of my own shoes. She-Lords are the most powerful of all fairies. They're overpowered, pretentious egotists who think they are the center of the universe. Pretty sure you just described Vance. A current of air thwacked Drake in the back of the head. "Ow! Chill, Vance." The Mage Lord had quietly reappeared behind us, now wearing his usual knee-length coat. I tilted my head back. "How are the necromancers?" "It's a wonder they're still alive," said Vance. "Half of them can't tell the difference between a tracking spell and a detection charm. Drake, what did I tell you about exercising control?" Drake groaned. "Bloody grass is too flammable." I snorted. "I nearly set him on fire with his own flames," I told Vance. "Might be a gap in your strategy there." "Damn it," said Drake. "It's like being apprentices all over again." "Well, you are acting like children," Lady Harper interrupted. "Mage Lord, a word, please." Weird that she didn't call Vance by his first name. She'd been his mentor, and a mother figure, too, after his parents died in the invasion. Vance moved away to speak to her, while Drake turned to me. "Help," he said. "I'm on her shit list for life now." "Thought you already were." "Nah, she hates you more. Can't think why." She doesn't hate you, Wanda said in an undertone. She thinks Drake's irresponsible, which is true. And Ivy, it's okay. Who cared if Lady Harper didn't like me? She was one bad-tempered 85-year-old retired mage, not on the council. Lady Granville had been reassigned to another region. Apparently, she'd imposed her reign of terror over Gloucester instead. Good riddance. Want to try again? Drake, throw the fire at me, not the garden. Got it. He grinned. Wouldn't want to piss off your boyfriend. Were you flirting with Ivy? Vance inquired. Drake covered his head. No. You know Drake flirts with everyone except Wanda and me, I said. That's because Wanda's like Vance's little sister, and he's been taken with you ever since you decapitated a hellhound in front of him. And they say I have questionable taste. Would one of you please stop that ungodly noise? Yelled Lady Harper. She pointed towards the house. What noise? Said Vance. Nobody's here but us and Quentin. He disappeared. I frowned after him and walked up the patio to the doors. A second later, Vance was at my side and pressed my phone into my hand. Someone's been calling you for the last 20 minutes. Oh, crap. I skimmed the touchscreen of my new phone. Vance had replaced my old one after I'd finally broken it in a fight with a territorial bridge troll. Hey, Isabel. Something up? Oh my God, Ivy! Isabel gasped into the phone. Every nerve in my body stood at instant alert. Isabel, are you okay? The leader of the Laurel Coven. She gulped. She's dead. Chapter 3. I stared at the phone, then pressed it to my ear again. What? We found her body in the same place we were robbed yesterday. Isabel's tone was steady, but I heard the tremor beneath it. She was supposed to check on the stores. The place the thieves had struck. You don't think... I don't know, but it's bad. We're still at the storeroom. Got it. I turned to Vance and quickly explained. I know you have clients coming in later, but... I'll come with you, said Vance. This is a case for the Mage Lords. How did she die? Isabel didn't say. Damn. Witches might not have the overt displays of power that mages and even half-fairies did, but most witches carried tripwire spells on them. Isabel did. Anyone who laid a hand on her was either flung 10 feet into the air, burned with invisible tongs, or hit in the face with itching powder or glitter, depending on her mood. The head of the coven would have had the best defenses. So how could someone have murdered her? Vance gave some quick instructions to Drake and Wanda before rejoining me. Whereabouts? Back at the storeroom, I said. It's the same place that was robbed yesterday. I didn't see anything, but the thieves disabled the wards once already. Vance transported us in a rush of cold air, and we landed on the pavement outside the storeroom. The door was closed, and Isabel emerged from a spell circle, accompanied by a plump, blonde woman of around 30 or so. I'd met her a couple of times. Shanna, one of the other coven members. She exclaimed as she caught sight of Vance and me. Too late, I remembered my hair and clothes were still dripping wet from the canal water. Mage Lord, she said. I didn't know you were coming. Sorry, said Isabel. This is Ivy. You've met, right? A while ago, yes. Shanna's voice shook, and she shakily clasped her hands together. The council haven't asked to consult with the mages yet. I assumed you'd want to discuss the leadership issue amongst yourselves first, Vance said. Isabel nodded and swallowed. Yeah. I'm second, but it'll come to a vote in the end. Shanna and I were checking the scene, but her body, it's with the coven. Tell me,
Did the attack happen here? Vance asked, somehow sounding both soothing and authoritative at the same time.
There.
Isabel pointed at the storeroom's entrance.
I think she was resetting the wards. Someone keeps taking them down. She was shot.
I frowned. Shot? Who even had guns anymore? The Faerie's arrival had rendered most conventional weapons useless. Only the military used them, and what was left of the country's regular, non-magical military forces rarely came here. Isabel swallowed, blinking hard.
Yeah.
Vance looked at me, then at the storeroom. Have you scanned the area?
We've tried everything, said Shanna. Tracking spells of all kinds, dispellers, detection charms.
And there's nothing.
It's like the area was wiped clean, said Isabel. There wasn't even any blood on the ground. But she's...
Her hands pressed to her face. I moved over to Isabel and hugged her.
It's okay, I said,
even though it wasn't. For one thing, fairies were my area of expertise. For another, witches were the ones you usually hired if you needed someone to track a murderer, or a private investigator, and Isabel and I were amongst a very small number in the area who specialized in cases involving magic. I didn't even know where to begin with this one. Isabel took in a couple of breaths, then seemed to pull herself together and stepped back.
Do you want to see her? The coven will let you in, but I'm not sure if they want to hire the mages.
You don't have to hire us, said Vance. Francine was a friend to the mages, and I'd be more than willing to contribute any resources you need in order to catch the killer.
Thank you, said Shanna. You can come and see her, but it's bad. I nodded to Vance.
Yeah, we should. Because if it was the same person who'd robbed the stores, they'd clearly made use of a cleansing spell of 3 this time. Renewed anger hummed through my veins as Isabel led the way to the town's main thoroughfare. Everyday noises and smells permeated the air. Exhaust fumes from the few cars on the road mingled with the scents of the local bakery, and the rumble of traffic drowned out the chattering commuters passing through to catch buses to work. This had become the unofficial center of the town which had risen up in the aftermath of the invasion, tacked onto a city which no longer functioned the way it used to. The Sidhe had trampled the original city center, and the remains had divided. Here, witch shops stood alongside convenience stores and stationery shops, grocers and banks, surrounded by lights which kept the shadows at bay, even at night. Humans had found safety in numbers, away from the menaces creeping through the shadows and infecting the town's darkest corners. Now someone, or something, had broken through that safety. But why kill the leader of the witches? When exactly did it happen? Vance asked Isabel.
Early this morning, said Isabel. Francine went out alone, but told a couple of the others. When she didn't come back, they sent people after her.
She took in a shuddering breath.
I don't understand. Whatever the attack was, it was small enough to slip through her defenses, yet powerful enough to kill her instantly. I've never seen anything like it.
Our gazes connected, and I filled in the blanks. We'd seen a lot of weird shit. My mind, inevitably, ended up on the fairies. But I couldn't imagine a troll hauling a man-made gun around. The local witches met in a converted town hall, a modest red brick building in dire need of renovation. The door was chipped wood, and the inside smelled vaguely of damp from rain getting through cracks in the roof. Next door was a house which had once been Francine's home. She'd been a widow with no children, and often let new witches stay at her house when they first joined the coven, if they had nowhere else to go. In the main hall, we found a room full of brightly dressed people, which somewhat went against the conventional image of witches, though Isabel had told me she suspected the local witches had adopted their colourful attire instead of black cloaks to stop non-supernaturals mistaking them for necromancers. Witches could be of any gender, not just female. Isabel had told me that the male witches had kicked up a fuss about the term warlock, while wizard sounded too Harry Potter, so witch had stuck. Back in the old world, witches hadn't had a great reputation amongst non-supernaturals. Unlike mages, who'd once prided themselves on their all-magical bloodlines a few centuries ago, witches had spread out amongst the general population, and some had even hid their abilities from their own families. It was possible for someone in an otherwise non-magical family to be born with witch magic, which was virtually never the case for mages. The end result was that witches had fewer resources than the mages did, though they were certainly a formidable force. There must be at least 30 people in the room. Isabel's was the largest coven in the area, and though she was second in command, she'd expected at least another 10 or 20 years to pass before she took Francine's place as leader. I scanned the crowd, wondering if any of them might have a motive for murder. Probably not. The leader wasn't necessarily the most powerful witch, just the most respected. All eyes were fixed on a point at the back of the room. A long table had been pulled out, and I caught a glimpse of a sheet covering— "Oh, man," I said under my breath. We passed through the crowd to a subdued huddle near the table. A pale, middle-aged woman with a shock of bright blue hair was talking to a shorter, younger Asian woman, with a pretty enough face to make me suspect she had Faerie ancestry somewhere. "We already used a tracking spell to replay the incident," said the blue-haired woman. "She came out onto the main street and collapsed without warning. The attackers must have come from above, because we didn't see them through the spell, but we're certain she was killed by a bullet, though it's difficult to tell with the body in this state. We need a professional healer to look at her." "Edith?" someone suggested. "Hey, it's Isabel, and—" The crowd turned to face us. All eyes immediately went to Vance rather than Isabel. A small gasp escaped the woman in front. "Mage Lord!" "He has my permission to be here," Isabel said quickly. "So does Ivy. They both have experience investigating crimes of this nature." "But—" The blue-haired woman looked at the Mage Lord. Nobody seemed to want to get near him. I was mostly immune to the effect Vance had on the unwary, but most of the others edged away, like he'd shifted in the middle of the hall.
"I'm only here to observe," Vance said. "If there is someone attacking prominent members of the magical community, I can send mages to assist you in keeping yourselves safe." I winced inwardly. Vance didn't mean to sound condescending, but his attempts to express concern often came out sounding like orders. "We have our own security wards," said the blue-haired woman, narrowing her eyes at him. "Someone broke them down," I said. "I was there with Isabel yesterday," I added quickly. "Might it have been the people who stole from the stores?" "Whoever they are, they're not human." The witch gave Vance a distrustful look, then whipped the sheet off the table. I gagged at the smell, metallic and tinged with the coppery traces of blood. But it was the witch's body that made me choke on vomit. Her skin was grey and cracked, like a statue on the verge of breaking into fragments. Her eyes were open, but only the whites remained. All colour had bled out of them. Blood trickled from the corners of her mouth, still bright red. The webbed gaps in her skin were crimson too. I closed my eyes, trying to regain some composure. "How? What could have done that? Are there any open wounds? Bites?" I'd never seen a fey creature do that to a person before, but maybe a spell? Only witch spells could be this selectively lethal.
that most traditional witches were pacifists, like Isabel, and reserved their aggressive spells for self-defense. The fact that nobody in the room had seen anything like it suggested that if it was a spell, it was custom-made.
Poison, Isabel said quietly.
Whatever she was shot or stabbed with, it was poisonous. We extracted traces. I'll have to use a detection charm to weed out what exactly was in them.
Vance and I couldn't do much but stand on the side. Neither of our abilities were any use in this case. I watched, hands curled into fists. I could fight physical threats, not invisible enemies. No traces of fairy magic were on the body, so the killer most likely wasn't a fairy, or none that I'd encountered, which made it pretty much none of my business at all. Except my best friend might be about to get embroiled in a power struggle. She was much younger than Francine, and I expected some of the older crowd would object to her taking control. Then again, Vance was the youngest on the Mage Council, and generally accepted as leader, and the witches were the stark opposite of the mages, who were prone to backstabbing and trying to wrangle positions on the council by deposing their predecessors. Except, if someone was set on eliminating witches, would they immediately target the coven leader's successor? Isabel pulled out a wooden table and set several detection spells in motion, muttering incantations as the ingredients revealed themselves. I watched the interplay of coloured lights around the 3 circles she'd set up. The other witches occasionally looked over at her, but it seemed the blue-haired woman had told them to stay away from the body. Wisps of conversation drifted over, as the witches discussed one of 2 topics. Who could have murdered Francine, and who would succeed her? Finally, Isabel looked up.
It wasn't a drug.
Our eyes met in mutual understanding. This wasn't the fairies.
Nor a regular poison. The effects came on her immediately when she was hit. Not like the gradual effect of poisoning, right?
That's what it looked like, said the blue-haired witch, who was elbows deep in a detection spell of her own on another table. She didn't ingest the poison, whatever it is. It's in her bloodstream. Have you searched the body for entry wounds? Vance asked. The dispeller he sometimes used had appeared in his hands. This reveals hostile spells, but it isn't reacting. Her body is in a fragile condition, said the witch. We've run the usual tests, but moving her may do too much damage. Don't touch her, Mage Lord. Vance's posture stiffened, but even he wasn't about to argue with the witches. He stood back and watched alongside me as the witches carefully turned the body onto its side. I looked overhead, not into the witch's blank eyes.
There,
said the part-fairy-looking witch. The room chilled. Vance's fists had clenched at his sides, and his magic had lowered the temperature at least 10 degrees. The blue-haired witch said, She was shot in the back of the neck. Looks like a bullet hole.
A bullet did that?
Vance stepped forward. She was shot, and the bullet contained concentrated poison, correct? So it would seem.
This. Isabel pointed shakily at her detection spell. It's a poison I've never seen before, and I've seen a lot.
But you've identified the ingredients? I asked.
She nodded. I can ask Edith at the apothecary if anyone's had any unusual orders. None of the ingredients were amongst those stolen from our stores.
Oh. Maybe the incidents weren't directly connected.
I don't think we can do much here, said Isabel. I need to talk to the others, but you two...
We can come back if you need us, Vance said. Isabel accompanied us to the door. Vance carried the same disquiet as before, as though he was thinking hard. Did he know something? What now? I asked him. You don't know who might have killed her, do you? He shook his head slowly. No. That poison, It looks familiar, but I might be mistaken. We should wait until the results come back before jumping to conclusions.
She was shot. That's worth jumping to conclusions for. I sighed. Okay. Theories? Because I'm in the dark here, to be honest.
Someone wished to eliminate the leader of the witches, said Vance. They did so by means of a poison unfamiliar to witches, and clearly ambushed her from a distance. However, if it is indeed the same people who stole from the store yesterday, they must have wanted to draw attention.
With that writing?
I cursed under my breath.
I'll bet it was a warning. Shit, I should have told everyone.
Writing?
Last night, I found a message at the scene of the robbery. It's not written in English, and it was glamoured, so only I could see it. I'll ask the chief if he can decipher it. Wouldn't make sense to leave a warning if the witches can't read it.
No.
Vance looked down at his phone.
Something's come up at the Necromancer Guild again.
Speaking of necromancers, they can't get involved, Isabel said quickly. Not if it wasn't a ritual killing. Could it have been? I asked quietly. Most high-profile murders in this town seem to have the same cause. Some nutcase trying to break the veil. There's no necromantic equipment, said Isabel. No summoning circle either.
There wasn't when Calder came back,
added Vance, who seemed to have the same thought. Because he was manipulating the veil from the other side, I said. I can ask Frank and Lord Evander, but there'd have been traces left behind if someone used necromancy. I paused. You know the best way to find out what happened? Isabel chewed on her lip. Yeah. About that. There's no way I can go behind the Coven's back at this point. We'll have to discuss amongst ourselves before we speak to her ghost. Thought so. Not sure how the necromancers would react if the entire coven showed up at the guild either. We can't tell them, she said. Not at least until we have a new leader, anyway. I know Lord Evander isn't in control any longer, but they don't do confidentiality agreements. We can't have the whole supernatural community finding out someone bested the most powerful witch in the city. Others might get ideas. I won't tell him, I said. I can speak to Frank. When's the new leader elected? It'll have to be tonight, she said, as we're so close to the solstice. But I don't even know how we'll handle the process.
The mages won't intervene, Vance reassured her. We stepped in at the Necromancy Guild because of the incidents with the veil and the lack of a suitable candidate. But the witches have a long history of stability, at least within this coven, unless there are likely to be problems.
The leadership contest isn't the issue, said Isabel. Our coven is small, compared to the mages, at least. The real problem is how she died, and whether that means we have an enemy. Possibly a common one. That bullet. She swallowed. I'll have to run some more tests, but it looks as though it has a particularly poisonous effect on magic users. It's designed to react in our blood.
Vance frowned. Are you certain?
I'm trying to devise a test. Short of testing it on a regular human without magic, we don't have a lot of options. Anyone know a willing volunteer? Maybe I'll give Larson a call. I'm joking, I added hastily. The tension in that room had wound me into tight knots, and I had to let the frustration out somehow. But actually, it wouldn't hurt to snoop around the mercenary guild. They hear things we don't. One of few disadvantages to no longer working for the mercenaries was that I'd lost touch with my old haunts, where I'd hang around to see if anything unsavory and Faerie-related was happening. Vance had contacts almost everywhere, but the mercs were more inclined to get their hands dirty and go to areas of the city no person without a death wish would dare walk into. Still, I couldn't think of a reason any of them would target the witches. Mercs were loners, generally, but some were friendly with the local covens and worked together on cases, which was, incidentally, how I'd met Isabel.
Would they know about a plan to murder the coven leader, though? Said Isabel skeptically. The mercenary guild doesn't employ paid assassins, last I heard.
Assassins? I echoed. Are we absolutely sure the attack was premeditated? Because last time a high-profile magical figure was killed, it was the fault of Calder's drugs, not the actual killer. They didn't have a motive.
This was different, Isabel said. The robberies, the attacks on our wards. Whoever did this can easily disable wards which take days to set up. And that bullet. The damage.
She took a couple of steadying breaths, while I regretted being so cavalier. I'd been used to looking at horrible events with my private investigator hat on, but although Isabel and Francine hadn't been close, she must be hurting. I hugged her. Sorry, I'm just trying to think of ways I can help.
I know.
She blinked tears from her eyes.
We need to agree about Francine's successor. Then we can work on those bullets.
Okay, I said. I'll see what I can do. We'll speak to the necromancers first. I turned to Vance, who was uncharacteristically quiet. He scowled at his phone. Colby requires my assistance again. He seems to be under the impression that I'm his boss. You did replace all the equipment and salt that got wrecked when Calder's army attacked. He probably hero worships you now.
He doesn't know about Francine's murder, does he?
Asked Isabel, looking alarmed. No, said Vance. That information remains confidential.
Good, said Isabel.
I appreciate the offer of help, but I'd rather get through this leadership change first, before we think of spreading word beyond the coven. I wouldn't want to make anyone else into targets for the killer, either. Having two supernatural groups without leaders might not be a conspiracy, considering the necromancers had been without a leader going on 6 months now. And the witches tended to make big decisions as a collective without nominating one person to do all the work. Isabel would have a tough time for the first few weeks, but her being leader didn't worry me nearly as much as the killer potentially going after her next. Yeah, I said. I think some of the mages should patrol the area. Doesn't have to be inside the meeting place. Or I could do it. I don't want those dickheads coming after you. Isabel's red-rimmed eyes narrowed a little. I'll make them sorry if they do. I don't mind mages being on patrol, but I'd rather nobody told the necromancers just yet. Lord Evander will probably have seen her near the Vale, I pointed out. There's no way it'll escape his attention. I can speak to Frank first, if you like. I guess they'll have seen her ghost. But Ivy, you haven't crossed the Vale in months. I don't think— Relax, I said. Ghosts are the least of our problems. It's easier than explaining myself to the living necromancers. Even when I go to speak to Frank alone, there's always someone eavesdropping, usually Colby or one of his friends. Ah. For some reason, her face flushed a little. Okay. You can tell the necromancer guardians, if you're sure. Positive. Catch me letting on that I made at least one round trip over the Vale per week, just to check no other wayward ghosts were on the loose, to see what Frank and Lord Evander were up to, and to check that no other powerful she or their gods had awoken and crossed over from the other side of death. It had been months since the supernatural community had been plagued with another potentially world-unbalancing problem. I turned to Vance. I'm going to cross the Vale at Necromancer HQ. Can you make sure nobody's eavesdropping on me when I do? Of course. Keep safe, I said to Isabel. Best to carry a few more tripwire spells. Oh, I plan to. A sharp edge closed around her voice. They won't get me next. but they already broke through the defenses of the strongest witch in the region. Worry gnawed at me as I walked away with Vance, and he transported us to the necromancer's place. Chapter 4. We landed beside the high iron fence encasing the overgrown backyard of the necromancer's headquarters, a graveyard without a single body buried inside. Monuments to all the people who'd lost their lives in the invasion filled the space in solemn rows. Nobody came here to pay their respects. The necromancers might be in charge of the dead, but their most notorious accomplishment was shoving the ghosts of everyone who'd died in the invasion through the gates of the Vale, and burning their bodies so they couldn't be revived. Whoever had achieved that feat, it wasn't anyone here. The sooty-coloured building lurking behind the fence was overrun with miserable-looking people in black cloaks, who looked like a cross between cosplayers and adults who'd never outgrown their teenage emo phase. This wasn't my favourite place. Vance knocked on the door once, then twice. A full minute passed. I sensed his irritation growing, and knew he wanted to use his ability to open the door. Finally, I jerked my head in the direction of the gate to their backyard. Vance nodded, and there was a clicking sound as the gate opened.
"I'll keep an eye out here," he said as I went through the gate.
Lord Evander had granted me permission to use the necromancer's mausoleum, back when he was still alive. It was always a bonus to have allies on the other side of the grave. The small wooden shed in the corner of their backyard contained nothing more than a summoning circle, consisting of 12 white-flamed candles. I retrieved the box of matches I'd left on the bare floorboards last time, and moved to light the candles before closing the door behind me. I didn't particularly like being shut in a dark shed, but it was that or risk being eavesdropped on. "Hey, Frank," I said to the summoning circle, as grey smoke coalesced in the centre. A figure appeared, a grey-haired man, blurred and wearing the suit he'd probably died in.
"Ivy," said Frank. "I'd hoped you decided to stop making trouble with the Vale."
"Sorry to disappoint you. Have you and Lord Evander seen anything odd lately?"
"What have you done this time?"
I took in a breath. "I'm gonna have to ask you to promise not to tell anyone else, living or dead, but the leader of the Laurel Coven was murdered this morning. We might need to contact her ghost." Frank's blurry form distorted even further.
"Francine? She was one of the most accomplished witches I've ever known."
"Yeah, tell me about it, but it's true. She's dead."
"And does Francine Second know you're here?"
"She's my best friend, so she does."
"You have friends in high places, don't you?"
"Hardly. Have you seen any disturbances with the Vale?"
"No, it's been quiet. Since Calder left, no ghosts have caused trouble on the path of the dead. I have people watching for whatever it is you try to do next."
"Well, I don't know if we're contacting her ghost yet, but the way she was killed is plain weird. I don't suppose you've ever seen poisonous bullets before?"
"Poisonous bullets?"
he asked blankly.
"No. I haven't walked on the earth for over 30 years, Ivy, and I was a necromancer, not a witch."
"Just checking." The door opened.
"Ivy?"
said Vance. "Yeah, I'm here. He hasn't seen anything."
"I'm a guardian of the gates, Ivy, not the living," said Frank. "I will endeavour to assist if you need me to find Francine before she passes beyond into the second layer of death."
"That'd be great," I said. "We need to know who her enemy is, in case they decide to target anyone else."
"Then I hope this is a matter of the living, rather than the dead."
"Me too. Mostly because death linked to the Grey Veil, and Isabel and I had dealt with enough trouble from Faerie's dark corner. I was fairly sure a magical bullet wasn't Fion's style, nor any of the other fairies, but I wouldn't rule anything out at this point. "That was a bust," I said to Vance as we walked past the graves to the exit.
"So was their call," he said irritably.
"What was it this time?"
"Colby's pet cat got stuck inside a summoning circle, and he lost his matchbox in the dark."
I snorted. "They really need a leader."
"Yes, they do,"
Vance said.
"But we need to see that the witches elect a new head of the coven first. Is Isabel most likely to become leader?"
"Yeah. Problem is, she's younger than most of the other contenders. Her mentor used to be second, and when she died a couple of years ago, she nominated Isabel to take her place. I don't think they'll have an issue, but the others might make it difficult to raise Francine's ghost."
"I see,"
said Vance.
"It seems our options are limited until a new leader is in place, and we can question them as to who might have had reason to destabilize the witches."
"You're sure it's someone they know?"
"Maybe. The witches might be skilled at curses, but they have comparatively few enemies."
"Because they don't walk around pissing people off, like you and I do. What's your plan?"
"Set some mages to keep an eye on certain spots around the site of the murder, to make sure no other witches are targeted. Then I'll check in with my contacts about whether anyone's seen any unusual bullets on the market lately. This seemed like a coordinated attack, so there must be a trail of evidence somewhere. With magic, you can't hide everything."
"Okay. Drop me at home. I need my sword if I'm going to poke around." We landed inside my flat without going through the door. Isabel had left spells all over the living room, as usual, and chalked circles covered the faded carpet and ceiling. Her color-coordinated spells made it look like an explosion in a stationery shop had taken place in the room. I picked up a few basics: healing spells, point-and-shoot explosives, trackers, and knockout spells. We didn't have enough of a stash if someone mounted an all-out assault. Anger flickered through me. You needed to be quick-thinking to survive in this world, and Isabel had that trait in spades. But she shouldn't have to feel unsafe in her own coven meetings. I was tempted to go back and play bodyguard, but I needed to snoop around the mercenary guild first. I went to my room to change and redo my hair. Even without going into Necromancer HQ, I always seemed to come back from the place smelling of grave dirt. "Want to come?" I asked Vance.
"I think the mercenaries will be less than inclined to talk if they see me," Vance said. "I should take over dealing with clients before Drake causes another incident."
"I'll come and see you in a bit, after I've talked to the mercs. I'm going to have a little word with the chief of the half-fairies, and see if he can read that glamoured writing I found at the murder site last night. I did tell Isabel yesterday, but I wish I'd asked sooner."
"You couldn't have known this would happen."
Vance's reassuring tone took some of the pressure off my shoulders.
"I can't remember the last time anyone's made an attack on the witches."
"Nor me. Definitely not since Isabel's been there. I'll ask the chief about the writing. Then we need to figure out if anyone else has seen any creepy masked guys in black running around."
"I'll ask my contacts, without mentioning the murder,"
said Vance.
"My mages' patrols cover most of the city. Unless these assassins are capable of hiding themselves from sight, someone will have seen them."
I nodded. "Okay. I'll see you in a bit." I kissed him goodbye, and he disappeared. Sighing, I left the flat, triple-checking our wards were in working order. The day was unseasonably hot. Unseasonable for the middle of England, anyway. I suspected the local fairies' magic was responsible. In a few days would be the summer solstice, the longest day, one of the most important to the witches, and summer fairies too. At midday, the most popular mercenary hangout was the shopping centre between the mercenary district and necromancer territory. I picked up a cheap sandwich from the stand at the food court I used to frequent, and walked casually through the crowds. I still blended in with my fellow mercs in my leather jacket and boots, with Helena strapped to my waist. But I looked less ragged than I used to. Nowadays, whenever I wrecked my clothes, I could put a simple repair or cleansing spell on them and they'd come out as good as new. If I didn't, then Quentin, the manor's housekeeper, would, whether I liked it or not. The amount of money that the major spent on pricey cleansing spells or replacing things because they got bored with them was staggering. My eyes travelled across the mercenaries with threadbare clothes, half-healed injuries, and scars. A cluster of homeless mercs hovered outside, but you could never tell if they were genuinely homeless or trying to scam every last penny out of people who didn't have much to spare in the first place. Mercenary work didn't pay well, so a large proportion of people who signed up to the guild were reckless or delusional. Or like me, and found that stabbing monsters was their only skill. Speaking of, my gaze snagged on a brutish-looking man with twin swords strapped to his back. Gregor. Last I'd seen of him, I'd threatened to blow his testicles off with a tripwire spell. "Nice to see you," I said through a mouthful of sandwich when he approached me.
"I didn't think you came here anymore. Now you're the Mage Lords."
"Tripwire spells, Gregor," I said, pointing to my sleeve with my free hand. "Please go on and finish that sentence." He gulped and backed up a couple of steps. I tossed my sandwich wrapper into the nearest bin and moved closer to him so he was backed against the balcony to the floor below.
"What do you want from me?"
"Seen any weird, creepy guys in black lately?"
"Thought you were with the mages, not the necromancers."
"I didn't mean the necromancers. Masked guys, assassin wannabes. Ring any bells?"
"No. Why, are you looking for a side job? I thought you got paid millions for doing nothing all day."
"That's what you think the mages do?" I gave him a sarcastic look. "They do more to protect the city than you, dickhead." I turned my back and went looking for more familiar faces. Unfortunately, trying to get a straight answer from a merc without threatening them was like squeezing water from a rock. Frustrated, I even searched the crowd for my former boss, Larson, but he wasn't around. Probably gambling the guild's money away at the casino. Larson was the reason half the mercs here were in such a sorry state. His failure to offer hazard pay, avoidance of any responsibility, and general laziness was such a total contrast to the efficient organization of the mages. Though I'd hang out with the mercs over the half-fairies. I regretted not bringing Vance with me almost immediately upon leaving the merc's place. The sun torched the skin on the back of my neck, and by the time I reached Acacia Road and the thick hedges surrounding Half-Blood territory, I felt like I'd taken a bath in the canal. Wiping sweat from my forehead, I stopped and checked my phone before heading for the gate. I conjured a subtle magical shield, too, which gave my body a bright blue glow, visible to any with fairy blood. That way, everyone would know I'd come to see the chief. He wouldn't be able to make excuses or hide. 2 guards let me through without so much as an acknowledgement. "Hi, Bob," I said to one of them. "You might want to turn the heating down." If outside the territory was unseasonably warm, inside the Half-Blood's place was like a jungle. Thick plants had grown all over the place. Bright flowers bloomed from every corner, and the loud noises of nature thwacked me in the face the instant I passed by the guards at the gate. Chirps, squeaks, growls, snarls, and other unidentifiable sounds pursued me down the path. I swatted insects out of the way. The territory smelled like a perfume shop, the air thick with scents that made my eyes water. Sweat gathered on the back of my neck and my hands as I walked, fervently wishing I'd left my leather jacket behind. It was like wearing a warm, heavy, furred animal. I'd have to work hard to keep my temper in check. The chief was in his usual spot, standing in the clearing where he met with complaining half-bloods. 2 ogres blocked the way, waving their clubs at me until I shuffled in line between 2 bad-eared teenage boys,
who seemed to have superglued their feet to human skateboards. I held back a laugh as they tripped over the threshold to the clearing. The chief, who stood on a higher part of ground in an attempt at authority, irritably waved his staff and they fell back, their feet no longer held in place. Guess he got a magical boost from it being so close to the solstice. "Ivy Lane?" he said as I took my turn. "Chief, I'm here to ask you to decipher something for me. I believe it's written in the Faerie language." I held out the scrap of notepaper where I'd copied the words. The ink on the wall had run, and I'd been holding the notebook at an angle, so the chief had to tilt it to squint at the words. "This isn't the Faerie tongue." My arms fell to my sides. "Isn't it?" "I read modern Faerie, and this isn't it." "What about ancient languages?" I unsheathed my sword, revealing the glyphs carved up the side of the hilt. The chief took a couple of steps back, completely failing to act casual. "This text, for example." He all but pushed the notebook page into my hands. "I can't read the ancient text, but look for yourself. It isn't the same language." I turned the page over. Damn, he was right. The glyphs on Helena's hilt were smooth, curling lines, carved with expert precision. The text I'd copied from the wall was harsh and jagged, like a foreign version of our own alphabet. So it's a human language? Obviously. There's no need to be rude, Chief. I folded my arms. The writing was glamoured, so I assumed it was written in the Faerie language. It looked similar to the ancient language invocations are written in when I first saw it. A muscle ticked in his jaw. He really didn't like being reminded that I could read invocations, as well as perform other magic which was supposed to be reserved for the Sidhe. Nobody would have been foolish enough to leave an invocation lying around where humans could stumble across it, he said. Nobody except you, perhaps. Hey, I've never done that. Technically true, though invocations had ended up in my hands twice, and we'd all nearly paid for it. Why can you read invocations if you've never been to Faerie anyway? I half expected to see steam come out of his ears. I'd not only reminded him that my magic was equal to Ashi's, but also that I'd spent longer in Faerie than he'd even dreamed of. But I really did want to know. Because, he growled, the ability to read the ancient language is in our very blood, in our magic. Ah, that made sense, actually. I'd stolen a Faerie Lord's magic, along with any perks that came with it. I already knew that there was always a risk of an invocation overwhelming the person who spoke it. Like any spell or talisman one took from the fairies, it tested to see if the person was worthy. When I'd spoken them, my spirit had nearly been severed from my body and sent into death. I could control when I used my fairy magic in battle, and it enhanced my speed and agility, but the part which could read fairy glyphs and speak invocations seemed to work only in life-threatening situations. Which was fine by me, because suddenly being able to speak a language I didn't actually know was downright creepy under normal circumstances. Is that it? Guess so. I sheathed my sword. Thank you for your assistance. I'll see myself out. I turned my back and walked away. I'd reined my temper in, but he didn't have to be such a prick. It was hardly my fault that I'd concluded the text must be in a fairy language, because it had been glamoured. Fighting back a groan of frustration, I quickened my pace. 3 dead ends in one day. I hoped Vance had better luck. And Isabel. My gaze travelled over the half-fairies going about their business. This part of their territory was inhabited by those who wanted to live as humans, but not amongst them, so most went out of their way to take on human appearances and blend in with the customs they observed from others living in the town. Others, like the shapeshifters and lower fae, like trolls, lived in wilder territories outside the town, or in the areas the invasion had destroyed. The territory definitely seemed emptier lately, even though most of the half-bloods were outside, sunning themselves on the grass, or in the case of the unseelie, hiding in the shadows of the forested areas and hissing at passers-by. I managed to reach the gates without pulling out my sword, then called Vance as I left the territory. Really, I should have asked him about the text first. Vance had told me he knew at least 2 other languages. He'd have more of a clue than me. The writing's a no-go, I told him. The chief says it's not a Faerie language.
Let me have a look at it,
he said.
I take it you and the chief didn't come to blows.
We were positively civil. Pity he wasn't any help.
Did he elaborate? Is the text a language he doesn't read, or not the Faerie tongue at all?
Could be either. He thinks it's a human one. It doesn't match the writing on my sword anyway, and that's ancient.
If the text didn't belong to the half-bloods, it might have been a signal from one Faerie to another. They don't tend to use 21st century technology. One might have left a message.
By the witches' stores, though. I paused and checked for oncoming traffic, or fairies, before crossing the road.
Maybe it's a code.
Perhaps I interrupted someone's nighttime meet-up. Though the witches' storehouses were a hell of a weird place to meet, especially for the fairies. Maybe the writing was irrelevant, but going back to the crime scene was out. The witches wanted to take control of their own investigation, and nobody knew where the bullet might have come from.
Show me the code,
Vance said.
I should warn you, Lady Harper is still here, and she's incredibly displeased about the murder, to say the least. She knows the witches.
Can she help?
Not if they don't want the majors involved.
Damn. But might she know who their enemies are?
Don't talk about me as though I'm not here,
growled Lady Harper's voice from the background. I'll be there in 5, I said to Vance, not at all willing to have another run-in with Lady Harper. She wasn't a witch, but her son had married one, Wanda's mother. Both had died in the invasion. Vance met me at the gate to the manor, besides the wrought-iron fences surrounding the Major's main property. Inside, carved hedges surrounded well-groomed lawns and stone footpaths. The manor itself was a grand construction, with walls covered in flowing glyphs for protection, and high arched windows above balconies. Through an open window, the noise of a piano playing drifted into my ears, and sent a cold rush down my spine. Vance gave me an apologetic look.
I'm afraid the only way I could think of to distract her was to let her have full run of the house.
She's an 85-year-old mage, not a dog. Though I really did hate that noise. After my narrow escape from Faerie, piano music was one of the things I couldn't be around anymore without being continuously reminded of my experiences. In this case, the day the Thorn Princess had taunted me with hallucinations of Avocus's fondness for cursing humans to dance until they died. I followed Vance down the wide, carpeted corridor into his office, pulling the notebook from my pocket and passing it to him. He studied the page with an expression of concentration, resting his other hand on the cherry-wood desk. The small room contained more books than anything else, stacked onto mahogany shelves at the back. I gladly closed the door on the noise, ignoring the warm temperature. The tune drifted through the door anyway, worming into my head, beating in time with my heartbeat. I gritted my teeth. Vance sometimes played the piano, generally when I wasn't around, but he at least gave me warning. Lady Harper, who could technically read minds, would have even more reason to call me a coward if she knew how much it bothered me.
I did ask her to stop,
Vance said, as though he'd read my mind. No worries. I passed him the notebook. I copied the text the best I could, but it was smudged from the rain.
I think we should speak with Francine's ghost first,
said Vance.
If this is what I think. But only you could read the text. Are you certain it was glamoured?
Yeah, of course. Isabel couldn't see it.
Care to share your theory with me?
I might be jumping to conclusions,
Vance said.
The people who used a similar text definitely weren't fairies. Not to mention they're dead.
Who?
You won't know them. Maybe Lady Harper will be able to read the text. She used to be close with the witch covens.
Great. A meeting with Lady Harper wasn't what I'd had in mind, but I followed Vance, resigning myself to talking with her. The old mage glowered at me from the wickerwork chair in the conservatory's corner, taking her time reading the text. Vance seemed unconcerned, leisurely standing nearby while she pored over the paper.
I can't read it.
Well, that was a waste of time.
What seems clear is that Francine had an enemy, and they gathered enough knowledge to bypass her defenses.
Her voice turned gravelly, and she fixed me with a dark stare. Amazing how a frail old woman wearing 7 layers of shawls on the hottest day of the year could look so much like a Bond villain. The text appeared at the crime scene less than 12 hours before the murder took place, I said. The store was robbed yesterday for the 3rd time in a week. Problem is, none of the things they stole had anything to do with the murder weapon. The witches replayed the scene through a tracker, but couldn't see her killers. That writing's the only clue we have.
This is no clue, said Lady Harper. It's a distraction. How did she die?
She was shot with a poisonous bullet, I said.
A magic bullet, she said. Deadly to mages, torture to humans. Terribly unpleasant way to die.
My heart missed a beat. You know them?
I know of them.
She fixed her stare on Vance, who remained unconcerned. What does he know?
Unfortunately, the bullet killed her instantly, and no others were found at the scene, so there's no proof it was indeed the same weapon, said Vance.
The same weapon as what?
A brand of magical bullet made illegal following the invasion, said Vance. The witches are currently discussing whether to resurrect the ghost of Francine and see if she knew who shot her, he added to Lady Harper. Of course they are, growled the old mage. Pointless if you ask me.
She'd be able to tell us if she had enemies, I said. Her tone needled me. I thought they were allies.
Of course she had enemies. You have a lot to learn, girl.
Don't call me girl. I'd about had it with her barbed comments.
It's true. Your ignorance is astonishing, considering you live with Laurel Coven second.
Care to elaborate? I mimicked Vance's most condescending tone almost exactly. The corner of his mouth twitched. She was shot with a magic bullet. Pretty sure that rules out the fairies. They won't touch technology.
I never said the fairies were the likely culprits.
They're ancient, I said. Aside from the gods. But I doubt that dragon I locked up in the Grey Vale has a mobile phone.
You shouldn't make fun of such things.
I met her level stare. It's how I deal with messed up shit like nearly being killed by she and ancient gods. I make fun. Not my problem if you don't like it. Lady Harper shoved the notebook into my hands.
If you're quite done.
Her fingers tapped on the piano keys again. I ground my teeth together. Thank you for your assistance, I threw over my shoulder. I didn't stop until I was back in Vance's office, where I'd left Helena on the desk. Vance closed the door behind him. That was enlightening, I said. Didn't want to jump to my defense.
I thought you were handling it fine on your own.
Sure I was. I glowered at the closed door. Any other people who might know how to read an ancient text? I picked the notepad up, flipping the paper upside down to see if it helped. It didn't.
I can scan a copy and send it to my contacts.
She said the bullet was fatal to humans too, right?
The bullets were designed to instantly kill any supernatural. A human might survive a day after being shot with one. A witch or mage would die immediately.
Damn. I shivered a little. I didn't want to find out the hard way which category I, a human with fairy magic, fell into. Isabel and Vance were equally vulnerable. So, if it is the same weapon, who does it belong to? You know, don't you?
Yes,
he said.
The bullets once belonged to a cult who tried to kill me and destroy the mages.
Chapter 5. I stared open-mouthed at Vance. Tried to kill you?
I thought I recognized the bullet's effects on magic users,
Vance said.
I might be wrong, but if not...
Then what?
Then everyone in the magical community may be in danger.
Dramatic much? I hurried after him as he turned without warning, opening the door again. What are you doing?
Looking for Drake. He can confirm my suspicions.
We walked past the doors to the spacious hall where events were usually held. I was fairly sure the mages had installed some kind of air conditioning spell in the walls, because the manor was the only place which didn't feel stiflingly hot. We found Drake outside the front gates in the position which used to be occupied by Ralph, the quarter Faerie guard, before Calder's minion had killed him a few months ago.
Come to let me off guard duty?
The fire mage groaned and rubbed his ankle, exaggerating the movement.
I've been here for hours. I have another job for you, said Vance. The leader of the Laurel Coven was murdered this morning. She was shot with a bullet which had suspiciously similar-looking effects to the ones the assassins who once targeted the mages used.
Drake's mouth dropped open.
What? Someone killed Francine! Keep it down, Vance said. We're under orders not to let the news go public, but Ivy also found text at the murder scene written in code and hidden by fairy glamour.
Drake's eyes flickered towards me.
Shit. I know. It might not be them, but those bullets are hardly the sort you find on the market. No kidding.
Drake shuddered.
Bastards. I thought we killed them.
Vance beckoned us to come into the front garden.
I'll ask another mage to take over your shift.
Who exactly is this cult? I asked Drake as we entered the manor again.
The Orion League. Or just the League.
Drake looked at Vance.
7 mages were killed our first week in office.
By those bullets?
Amongst other things.
Vance disappeared, while Drake went through the door on the right, which led into the living room. Mahogany bookshelves lined with paperbacks filled most walls. I assumed they'd belonged to Vance's parents, because he kept his own books upstairs. A heavy wooden table, sometimes used for meetings, was covered with a hand-drawn map of the city. Someone, probably Drake, had drawn a cartoon dragon in the bottom right corner and labeled it, "Here be dragons." Nice, I commented. He'd marked the spot where the ancient shifter god had awakened. The ley line was a thick black marker line through the page.
Isn't it? Said Drake.
I was in the middle of embellishing the map when he sent me off to guard duty. Vance reappeared and closed the door.
That map was supposed to go to the district's council meeting. They'll have to deal, said Drake. All right. What do you want to know?
Who are these assassins? I asked.
Vance knows more than I do. He killed their original leader.
Wait, you did?
Yes, said Vance. They're an offshoot of a very dangerous organization, which once lived underground as supernaturals did, before the invasion. The arrival of the Sidhe was supposedly a sign of a war prophesied by their leaders. Except none of the group actually expected the Sidhe to show up and obliterate the modern world. So they split into fragments after the invasion. This particular strain believed the mages should be exterminated and control given back over to the people.
So they thought they saw the invasion coming?
No,
Vance said flatly.
Not according to Lady Harper, and she's old enough to remember them. They were cultists who attracted enough of a following to draw attention from supernaturals. Their goal was to wipe us off the face of the earth.
They wanted to wipe you off the face of the earth. I blinked. I get that some humans don't like supernaturals, but come on. It's pretty obvious who has the upper hand. Any weapon humans could devise paled in comparison to the power of the average mage, let alone the she. As for witches, they could run circles around regular people. But then, how could assassins have killed Francine? Vance's mouth twisted.
Those bullets used to be widespread in the aftermath of the war. 6 months after the peace agreements were drawn up, all such weapons were confiscated and destroyed. However, as we found a year or two ago, a small number survived.
Damn. With a bullet that could kill any supernatural, I guessed I understood why a group like that might have been around before the invasion, when supernaturals lived in hiding. But after? No human invention could hurt a she. They probably wouldn't kill a half-blood either. No. They were designed to kill humans, like witches and mages. A sour taste filled my mouth. I turned to Drake. So you killed all of them. Did they have anything to do with the fairies?
Fairies? Said Drake. Didn't you hear the part where I said they hated all supernaturals?
The message at the murder scene was glamoured. Drake shook his head.
Why would a fairy use bullets when they have magic? Who can say? Said Vance. Those bullets were manufactured abroad, I believe, before the invasion, but they shouldn't be around any longer. I was a little too thorough in taking care of the problem. By the time I reached the survivors' hideout, they'd committed mass suicide using their own bullets.
Whoa. Really? I'd known Vance had been the target of assassins early in his career as one of the mage lords, but not that the situation had been that dire.
I wouldn't call it the highlight of my career. Understatement of the bloody century, said Drake. We managed to keep it quiet, just to stop other people getting the same idea.
But apparently someone has, I said. That meant they might not necessarily have the same objective, or even be the same species, if they used witch spells.
Yes, said Vance. Drake, I want you to question every mage who's patrolled near the area where the text was found. That's witch territory, though.
Maybe they targeted the witches first for a reason, I said. A robbery at the witches' stores wouldn't instantly make you think of assassins, would it? Unless they stole from you last time?
Someone robbed the witch's stores before she died? Asked Drake.
Yeah, 3 times in the last week. I paused. Isabel already found out the bullets weren't made using ingredients from the stores, and they haven't had long to pull their plan together. Someone's working overtime.
The bullets were likely manufactured independently, said Vance. This can't be a movement on the scale of the League. Not as it existed before the invasion, anyway. We'd have noticed. Nah, it won't be, said Drake. It's a hell of a lot harder to kill off supernaturals when they're in charge, not to mention 50 times as powerful. The attacks on the Mage Council last year weren't about empowerment, but about anarchy.
I nodded slowly. So we're talking potential anarchists who want to destabilize the magical community through killing its leaders?
Yes, said Vance. I would guess that a small group of would-be renegades has taken their name. The fact that they left a message suggests they met in private, perhaps traveling separately to avoid attention.
That'd work, aside from the fairy glamour, I said. Might they have fairy blood, or one of them on their side?
Perhaps, said Vance. If we decipher the text's meaning, we might be able to work out their plan.
My phone vibrated. I jumped, pulling it from my pocket. Isabel, did something else happen? No, she exhaled. I thought you should know I got in. I'm the new coven leader. I stepped back, away from Drake's curious look, nodding to Vance to let him know she was okay. Wait, I thought it wasn't until tonight. The official ceremony is tonight, but I'm in. Oh. I didn't want to say congratulations, not when the price had been so high. Great job. Do you still want me to come? Actually, she hesitated. The others don't want outsiders coming in. I can make the decisions, but I don't want to cause any conflicts. It's pretty fragile. Nobody knows what those bullets are. Vance might, I said. We have a theory, but we'll have to do some more research first. I told her what I'd found out. So you think people following this cult, whoever they are, might be killing supernaturals? It's all we've got, I said. Even though it makes no sense that they used glamour. Vance says he might be able to figure out what the text says anyway. Are you certain? No, I said. I wasn't there a year ago. You know that. But if Vance thinks it's the same people, it probably is. He's usually not wrong. Much to my annoyance sometimes. Well, we can talk theories later. The others have decided to honor Francine's wishes and cremate her. I know there haven't been any undead incidents lately, but just in case, we're doing it this evening. Okay. Do you want me to come? It's witches only, she said apologetically. And some of the witches are saying you attract trouble. I'm not saying it's your fault, not at all, but you do have a reputation. Oh. Also? Ouch. I squashed my instinctive hurt feelings. She was just being honest. I understood. But it didn't mean I had to like the idea of Isabel going it alone. Whoever had committed the murder had switched off those powerful wards, like snuffing out a candle. Right. I couldn't sneak back in disguise. Isabel would recognize one of her own spells. It wasn't fair to potentially jeopardize her standing with the other witches. If she called me, I'd join her. Otherwise, I'd do what I could on my own. I'll see you later, Ivy. Tomorrow? Yeah. But call me if anything happens tonight. Please. If it's the same thieves who brought down the wards, I don't want you getting hurt. Of course. I'll let you know when I'm home, okay? Yeah. Bye. I hung up. Tears stung my eyes. Not so much from hurt, but because Isabel didn't deserve to get dragged into this mess. I was the one who went around poking monsters.
What is it?
Vance rested a hand gently on my back. Isabel's the new leader. We aren't invited to the meeting tonight.
I expected so.
Someone tried to kill the last leader. What if they go after her next? I can't watch her all the time. The other witches won't let outsiders in, and unless they had a specific reason to target Francine, they'll be after other supernaturals. Which might mean Isabel. Or Vance.
Chill, said Drake, conjuring a flame into his hand. Nobody'll screw with us again. As for the witches, you have guards out there, right?
Vance nodded.
I'd go there in person, but we're trying not to draw attention. I've no doubt the witches will ally with us against this enemy, but I'd prefer nobody else to be targeted as a consequence.
Okay. We'll look into this text. I paused. Can't we set up an ambush at the Coven's place?
It's too risky, said Vance. This attacker neutralized all the storeroom's witch wards. That means most concealment or illusion spells would also be removed, leaving anyone wearing them vulnerable to attack. Those bullets kill instantly. We'd have no second chances.
Damn. He was right, but I hated the idea of staying put while Isabel and her coven potentially ran dangers.
The mages patrolling have a way to draw my attention instantly, he went on.
Every time something like this happens, I think it's him. Fionn. Vance frowned.
I wouldn't dismiss the possibility, but the Shi's arrival cost the original League everything. If they bear the slightest resemblance to their previous incarnation, they'd never ally themselves with fairies.
Vance wasn't as overt with his hatred of the Shi as I was, but spending time around him had tuned me into small things, like the way his expression tightened whenever I mentioned Fionn or the Shi. They'd killed almost his whole family, and I suspected Fionn had had a hand in their deaths. I'd told Vance my suspicions, because it wasn't fair to keep it from him. I'd agonized for a while, not wanting to poke that particular beast, but eventually blurted it out one night. Vance had listened calmly, then said he'd suspected as much.
Fionn is an enemy to our realm, but I wouldn't be foolish enough to seek him out on my own, he'd said. If he comes here, however, I will show him no mercy.
Neither would I. That he'd disappeared for 6 months struck me as suspicious, but then again he'd gone into the Grey Vale, where time passed differently to here. I'd lived out 3 years there, which turned into 10 in human time. Maybe I'd luck out and he'd never return in my lifetime, though it wouldn't look good for the rest of humanity if he did. Okay, I said. Assuming it's someone who hates all supernaturals, why would they target the witches first?
If I might hazard a guess, it's because working out a witch's weakness is marginally easier, said Vance. All witches use the same spells. Each mage has a different ability, so it would take more effort to figure out how to approach them. I can displace the bullets, for instance.
Good point. Fairies are unpredictable too. Though someone had helped the burglars use glamour to hide their messages, and the idea of supernatural-hating zealots allying with the fairies didn't exactly fill me with confidence.
The enemy is in the minority, said Vance. Not only that, they're cowardly. What little power they have is immaterial. The majority of us want peace, and we're willing to use what we have to defend the people of the city. The mages haven't forgotten the last time we faced the League. We'll defeat them again.
I let myself believe him, at least for now. Let's get those patrols sorted. I won't let anyone else die today. Chapter 6. A beeping noise woke me from sleep. I jumped and fumbled around in the dark for my phone. I'd slept in shorts and t-shirt despite the heat for precisely this reason. I pressed the phone to my ear. Isabel? Ivy, Isabel whispered. There's someone in the house. Shit. Don't move. I flung the covers aside. My shoes appeared by the bed, along with my sword, which I grabbed in one hand before scrambling over to Vance. His hand closed around my wrist, and we reappeared inside the living room of my flat. He'd tugged on slacks and a loose shirt, unbuttoned, and his own sword appeared in his hand as we landed. My feet caught on a spell circle. One of Isabel's. A faint noise made me jump, but it was just Erwin. He was trapped inside a cage, tiny fists beating at the sides. Isabel probably put him there to stop him making a noise and alerting the trespassers. I tiptoed across the room to the doors to the bathroom and our own rooms. Isabel's wide-eyed face peered around her bedroom door. They're upstairs. The spells ought to have stopped them, but... She paused, listening out, but none of us heard anything. Trapping spell, I whispered. Vance can use his ability to leave one on the landing. She nodded. I didn't dare go outside. Through the peephole, someone walked past. Masked. He had a gun. My heart lurched. We'll glitter bomb him to death. See if he can be stealthy then. She gave me a faint smile and handed a spell over to Vance. I took several myself, though my magic would work just as well. On impulse, I flung a shadow spell over myself. Isabel shook her head at me. I mouthed, "It's okay." If the attackers could neutralize witch spells, this wouldn't work, but it might buy me a few precious moments of time. Vance displaced half a dozen spells before we heard a clattering noise above. Then he disappeared. Damn it, Vance! I ran to the flat door and out into the corridor. I didn't need to stay in the shadows with the corridor this dark. Running upstairs as swiftly as I dared, I followed the sound of footsteps. Vance crouched at the end of the upper landing. A series of noises came from the office, where he must have displaced the spells to trap our trespasser. I crept around him to peer through the glass panel at the top of the office door. 3 figures inside were encased in faintly glowing black bars. Isabel's trapping spells worked a charm. The glass shattered. I ducked, shielding myself with both arms, my heart thudding. Someone had fired a bullet right through the window. Through the trap. Oh, hell. There was only one way for the attackers to run. Right at me. I raised my sword, summoning up a shield to deflect any further attacks. 5 seconds passed. Unable to stand the tension any longer, I risked a peek through the window. The trap was empty, and the trespassers had gone. I stared a moment. Where? Shit. I'd forgotten the fire escape at the back of our office. They're heading for the roof, I whispered to Vance, hoping he heard me. Not that I particularly wanted to face assassins with magic bullets in an enclosed space, but anyone could get hurt from up there. I flung the door open and ran through the office to the fire door at the back by the filing cabinets. The bastards moved fast, because only one figure was visible on the other side, heading for the stairs that led to the roof. A bullet whistled past my cheek. I ducked and shot magic at the attacker, clearing 3 stairs at a time as I ran after them. The trap hadn't worked. It was supposed to be bulletproof. Where the hell was... Without warning, the flat shook so hard, I thought a troll had landed on the roof. I staggered to the side, holding onto the rail for balance. A scream came from downstairs. Isabel. I let go of the rail and turned back. A thick root burst through the floor, piercing the stairs and blocking my path. Killer plants? What the hell? Blue light ignited along my blade, and the plant exploded into pieces over the hallway. A deadly Faerie plant that shouldn't be in here. Laughter sounded behind me, followed by a skittering noise. A bundle of spindly arms supported a thick, shadowy body. Unseelie Fae. Shadowy tentacles lashed out, forcing me back. There wasn't enough space to maneuver in here. My heart dropped as the truth sank in. The thieves hadn't just disabled the front wards. They'd killed the defenses around the whole flat. In other words, the whole of Faerie could move in here and claim the house as their own. Get out! I yelled, raising my sword. Magic pulsed out from the blade, piercing the shadows with puncture-like wounds. The Unseelie reeled back, shadows spilling from the holes like blood. I needed to find Isabel before something worse got its claws in her. Where in the hell was Vance? Tasty human, growled the shadows over my shoulder. Oh, for crying out loud. I sent another energy blast at the beast in front of me and spun to face the new threat. The creature clung, limpet-like, to the wall with its 2 limbs. I knew from painful experience that those limbs were covered in octopus-like suction cups, designed to latch on to their prey. Their heads, meanwhile, were 90% mouth. Again, to grab their victims. These charming creatures survived exile by sucking the skin from humans. They had a one-track mind. Kill. 1 step towards the creature, then 2. I kept a magical shield around myself in case its limbs lashed out. I can taste your magic, human, the creature moaned. Ugh, I wanted to vomit. Instead, I said, taste this then, and fired a torrent of magic at it. The creature detached from the wall with a horrible sucking noise, and landed on the stairs, leaving bits of graying skin everywhere. Despite appearances, they were wicked tough to kill. And another problem, it was draining my life essence with every step. Not as potent as the Life Drinker sword, but enough to slow my Faerie-enhanced movement to human speed. Exactly what I didn't need. The shadow's shape twisted and reformed itself, making it tricky to land a hit, especially encumbered by my position in the middle of the stairs. My magic fanned out from the blade, smacking into the wall. Rage burned in my blood, and I fed it into the magic. This creature had violated my home. It'd pay with its life. My blade pierced the shadows and sank into the roof of the fey creature's mouth. Anger rushed through me, and the creature burst apart under the assault of my magic, until it was nothing more than shadows and dead skin. I was close to the top of the stairs, so I ran up, even though I knew I'd be too late. The assassins had gone, but they'd left a mess behind. Isabel and I had placed wards at strategic points around our flat, and I had a bird's-eye view. The iron spell positioned behind the recycling bins wasn't dead. Someone had switched it off, along with the concealment spells which had kept it hidden from sight. Another vine snaked up through the wall below me. The entire side of the house was covered in some kind of creeping plant. Great. A scream sounded from below. My heart dropped. Isabel was on the lawn below me, surrounded by more thick, spiky plants. Wherever Vance was, he might not reach her in time. I wouldn't get downstairs fast enough, but the vine underneath me was positioned above the recycling bins. If I moved quickly enough and didn't fall— This is a stupid idea, thought the part of my brain not overwhelmed with panic and adrenaline, as I leaped over the snaking vine and used it as leverage to climb halfway down the house's side. Just another few meters, and I'd be able to reactivate the ward, turning the monster attacking Isabel into confetti. A bullet hissed over my shoulder. I dodged, moving too fast to strike, but the effect on the plant was unexpected. Where the bullet struck, the plant shriveled grey. My grip slid down. Shit. Another bullet clipped the top of my head. I cursed and dropped a couple of feet, just as the rest of the plant shriveled up like someone had upended a canister of weed killer over it. I dropped, scrambling to get my body into a position where the impact wouldn't hurt like hell. A final bullet zipped towards me. I flipped over in the air, deflecting it with my sword. My shoulder wrenched at the unexpected impact, and I hit the ground. Hard. Something cracked in my arm. Ow. Blinking tears from my eyes, I reached out with my right hand. My left lay numb beneath me, and my fingers closed around the iron ward. Grey-green light engulfed the garden and the house. A splintering sounded, and I twisted to look over my shoulder. The pieces of deadly plant fell apart, broken by the iron spell, as the ward flickered back to life under my hands. Isabel backed away from the remains of the plants which had been attacking her. Thank God. She's okay. Vance materialized behind me.
The attackers have gone.
Ow. I lay down on the lawn, groaning. Don't suppose you have a healing spell?
Broken arm and concussion, said Vance. What did I say about not taking risks?
You didn't specifically say, don't jump off the roof to switch the wards back on before Faerie's monsters chew up the house. I winced as every word drove another hammer into my skull. We'd moved to the manor after it became clear the Faeries had damaged the foundations of the flat. Like the landlord didn't have reason enough to hate us already.
The bullets they fired at you are here, said Vance. Isabel picked them up. Why, of all ways to get your hands on the enemy, did you have to try something so downright suicidal, reckless, etc.? I rubbed the back of my head.
I'm not proud of it. but half of Faerie tried to move into our house. We have giant holes in the floor, disintegrated plant all over the lawn, and whatever the hell that crawling thing was is lying dead in the fire escape. Oh, and the monster that tried to suck off my skin.
I'll fix the damage, Vance said. As for you, lie down. Concussions and healing spells don't always go together.
No kidding. Pretty lights danced before my eyes. I glowered at them. Vance had laid me on the sofa in the back living room. Not the one used for meetings and to store Vance's parents' old antiques, but the one for actually living in. A flat-screen TV covered the far wall, and the shelves were filled with as many DVDs as books. It was one part of the manor which looked like it belonged to this century. Vance dropped the bullet on the low glass table in front of the sofa. His shirt was torn in places, stained with the blood of whatever fairy creature had attacked him while I'd been doing battle with the skin-sucking leech upstairs. Isabel cleared her throat. The landlord will probably kick us out if he knew. Make sure there aren't any more of those bastards lurking around first, I told Vance. That Fae was a nasty piece of work, but it's the assassins we need to catch. Neither of you saw where they disappeared to, did you?
No, said Vance. They were on the roof, so their options were limited. I'd guess they climbed down the back way, but I checked the garden and didn't see anything. I even tried a tracking spell, but I would hazard a guess that they erased their traces.
Great. Fixing the damage before the landlord realized the flat had almost been eaten by nature wasn't as important as catching the dicks who'd shot at us. Vance leaned down and kissed me on the forehead before disappearing. I half sat up, groaning again as pain bit through my skull. Damn breakable human body. Be careful, said Isabel. A worried frown pinched her lips. You aren't in Faerie. You can't heal from a fatal wound if there's no healing spell nearby. Think I've learned that lesson by now. I managed to prop my head against a cushion and look her in the eyes. Our house isn't safe anymore. Neither's here, if it's true. This place has other protections on it, I said. You can stay here. I'm sure Vance won't mind. There are a dozen spare rooms. He's already used that argument. She sighed, running a hand through her frizzy hair. The coven's out there. The killers might be after all the witches, not just me. Have you heard from them? Some of them checked in on me. You're the most likely target. Stay with us tonight, and we'll find those bastards tomorrow. You sounded exactly like Vance then. Isabel sighed again. I won't argue, but I need to sort out a bunch of crap with the coven tomorrow. Not to mention they won't react well to news of the attack. Nope. Especially considering someone switched the wards off. I reactivated the iron circle, and it came back on right away. Is there a counterspell? Like Vance's Dispeller, but more powerful? Isabel frowned. Not that I know of. We need to find out who they are and what their grudge is against the witches. If they are linked to the group Vance mentioned, that'd give us a starting point. Vance reappeared, along with a small, shrieking, winged figure. Bad fairy! Bad human! Oh, crap. Sorry I forgot about you, Owen. You didn't see how the intruders took out the wards, did you? Isabel asked him. Owen shook his head frantically. No, bad fairies everywhere, all bad. Yeah, they are. Owen shrieked and flew into the TV screen. Bad magic! Vance gave me a look that said plainly, what in hell is this creature? I laughed, then regretted it as my head throbbed. I'd keep him away from the antique china, I told Vance. And that was that. With nowhere else to go, I tried to nap on the sofa. Isabel insisted on staying in a nearby armchair rather than going to a guest room,
but neither of us slept. Vance didn't even try. I dozed off for 5 minutes, only to jump awake at the sound of Erwin flying overhead, pursued by Vance. Between the two of us, we managed to get the Pisky into a small cage he'd found somewhere in the manor. Whatever it had originally contained, even Vance didn't know. If you're wondering how we put up with him in our flat, I've no idea. My headache had subsided, but running on little sleep, my temper was in a delicate zone. Isabel yawned from a heap of blankets on the armchair. "What time is it?"
5 in the morning, said Vance. Aren't you meeting with the necromancers today?
Shit, you're right. Isabel sat up, pushing the blankets aside. Vance left the room with Erwin's cage. "About that," I said to Isabel. "How would you like a bodyguard?" Her gaze snapped onto me. "Not you. No way. It's me they want dead." "And Vance, and a lot of people." "You already had a close call. You can come along when we speak to Francine's ghost anyway. Pretty sure we need your expertise." All right. I talked to her about the bodyguard issue later. We usually checked up on one another anyway, because of the number of close calls we'd had. But we'd relaxed our guards a little, as the months had passed and no she had arrived to wage war on the city again. Nobody else is going to hurt Isabel. Not on my watch. I walked barefoot to the kitchen in search of sustenance. I found a tired-looking Vance buttering toast. "What did you do with Erwin?" I asked.
Left him in the spare room with strict instructions to Quentin to keep an eye on him and make sure nobody else goes in there.
"You know Drake will do it anyway, right?"
"Yes,"
he said irritably, refilling the coffee maker.
"Where did he even come from?"
I glanced at Isabel as she walked in, wearing the black funeral clothes she'd salvaged from the flat before we'd left. There was a Pisky infestation the week we moved into the flat, and he refused to leave. Now I'm pretty sure he's a full-time tenant. Amazed the landlords never found him. He keeps out spiders, if nothing else. Isabel nibbled half-heartedly at a piece of toast before running off to answer a call from the coven. I wished I could take some of the hassle off her hands. Vance and I were used to dealing with wrangling unreliable supernaturals into order, but I didn't even know where to begin with witch politics. There was one thing I could do, though. Speak to a ghost. Chapter 7. 6 of the witches came with us to the necromancer's place, including Shanna and the blue-haired woman from yesterday. She seemed to have mellowed towards Vance and me after hearing about Isabel's narrow escape last night. Colby and another necromancer let us into the building. The second man, a 6-foot-tall guy with shaggy blonde hair and glasses, looked entirely too perky for someone who spent his free time reburying the dead. "Isabel," he said. "I didn't know you were bringing friends." "This is Ivy," said Isabel, and introduced the other members of the coven. I shot her a quizzical look. Did she know the guy? "Did you ask the other necromancers if we can use the main room?" "Yes, but I didn't say why. I also told them to leave you alone during the summoning." Isabel's face relaxed. "Thank you. We're still searching for the killer, so we're keeping it under wraps." We went into the corridor, and I hung back to walk alongside Isabel. "I didn't know the necromancers were doing you favors." "I sent them some spells, so they owe me. Rick and I have talked." "Talked, huh?" Isabel went scarlet, to my surprise. Wait a minute. That's what I got for spending most of my time at the Major's place. I'd interrogate her when we were away from the necromancers. Inside the main room, a summoning circle dominated the floor, surrounded by 12 candles at intervals. The blonde necromancer lit them with the help of Colby, who nervously directed the witches to stand outside the circle. I'd never seen so many people in the main room before. The way things were going, I expected Fionn to jump out of the circle and say, "Boo!" Well, Maybe not. That would go against his badass image. I really need some more coffee.
I told the others to stay out, said the blonde necromancer.
Rick, huh? I felt a weird sense of protectiveness towards Isabel, despite the fact that she could handle herself better than me half the time. I had badass power, while she had a level of intelligence that I wished I could apply in a crisis. She'd make a better diplomat than me. Isabel hesitated beside the circle.
Francine,
she said, when Colby asked the spirit's name. Her voice trembled a little, but the circle surged, drowning it out. Smoke coalesced, and a kindly-faced woman in her early 60s flickered into view.
Isabel?
Oh, Francine. She choked on the word. I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to do.
It's okay, dear. I thought you'd want to talk to me.
Isabel wiped her eyes furiously with her sleeve. Seeing that she wasn't in a state to speak, I said, Sorry, but we need to know if you remember anything about who killed you.
Nothing, she said. I was on my way to the stores and heard a whistling noise, and the next thing I know, I was here.
Isabel went on tremulously. So, you didn't see the killers? You don't have anyone you suspect? Francine's body flickered in and out within the circle.
No. Many would want to cause the witches harm, but none who presented an immediate danger.
Whoever they are, they attacked Isabel last night too, I said. They disabled our wards. Do you know anyone who can do that?
Another witch? Some might have the skill, but none would have the motivation. One witch's wards are their own business and nobody else's.
Usually wards can only be disabled by the person who set them up, said Isabel. I've been thinking of theories, and might they have found a way to mimic the imprint of the witch who laid the spell?
I looked at her. I'd never thought of that. Our wards had been in place for years, and Isabel had installed them herself. The old woman shook her head.
No. You can take another person's DNA, or even their fingerprint, but you can't mimic another witch's signature. What they have is something I thought didn't exist. A way to neutralize a ward. A counterspell, perhaps.
Okay. I held up the notepad. Do you recognize this text? The ghost leaned forward.
No.
We found it at the crime scene 12 hours or so before you died, I said. It was glamoured. I thought a fairy had left it. But the half-fairy chief says it's not a fairy language.
If that's the case...
She cut off in a scream. The greyish smoke flickered, then went out altogether. Francine? I said uncertainly. Frank? Lord Evander? Nothing. The smoke went see-through, then dispersed as though blown away in a non-existent breeze.
Whoa, said Colby. I'll try turning it on again.
You can do that. Frank appeared in a swirl of smoke.
She's gone, said the necromancer. Whatever that force was, she was sent through the gate. I couldn't stop her.
Shit, I whispered. There went our lead. What was that?
I couldn't tell. The veil stirred, and a force pulled her towards the gates. It happens sometimes, but I can't say I know the cause. Ripples in the veil.
Ghosts?
No. A single ghost can't stir up the veil.
Not a ghost. I knew someone who probably could, by passing between realms. Shit. Not like I could hop over to the Grey Veil and check. Or maybe I could, but I really didn't want to. Theon was somewhere over there, waiting for my answer as to whether I'd join him, potentially setting up a trap to hold me in Faerie forever. We waited half an hour, reset the summoning circle a dozen times,
Even tried the one in the mausoleum. Nothing. Francine had vanished. Even Lord Evander showed up and said he didn't know what caused it.
This zone has always been precarious, he said. Most of the dead can't linger. She lasted longer than most.
She shouldn't be dead at all, Isabel whispered. I'm sorry, Isabel. I looked at the two necromancers. Is that normal? For a ghost to just disappear?
Don't worry, said Colby. It was probably a glitch.
Summoning circles can glitch.
Maybe. The veil's fine. We'd know otherwise.
Considering my experience with unknown forces consisted of the she and a furious shifter god, this wasn't reassuring in the slightest. Resigned, we left the necromancer's headquarters behind. While the other witches parted ways at the road's end, Isabel and I were left alone. So, I said, you and Rick, how long has that been going on? How long has what been going on? You're not going to pretend to be dense, are you? When I was on at you about Vance, you didn't need to pretend. Touché. I sneaked a look at Vance, who looked in the direction of Necromancer HQ, as though pretending not to listen to our conversation. All right, have it your way. Just wanted some light-hearted distraction from our imminent deaths. What now? Do you have any coven leader responsibilities today? Actually, her smile faded. The funeral's at noon. Then we can resume the search. I closed our office. Our office had broken glass and dead fairies in it last I checked. I smothered a sigh. Will you be able to keep doing cases like ours if you take on the position as coven leader? I don't mind, but we'll have to sort out the office before we even begin to figure out where we go from here. Of course I will, said Isabel. It's no different to my old job, just a few more responsibilities. Once we've caught this killer. I nodded. All right. Vance and I have a possible lead on the text we found at the murder site. We'll see to that. Then I'll come and meet you after the funeral. Sure. I'll get to work on the bullets again. I need to check the ones from last night have the same ingredients as the others. I'll pick up some more detection spells. I used all of ours. Okay. Call me if anything happens, and Vance and I will be there. You have 2 bodyguards. Isabel rolled her eyes. Hope it won't be for long. Now you know how I feel having to deal with him all the time. I winked at Vance, who gave me a smile. All right, let's go and translate some codes. Vance took us back to the manor in a rush of all-too-welcome air. By now the sun had come out and was doing its best to make up for being absent 90% of the time. The air in the manor was thick and oppressive, and the sound of a piano playing at high volume wafted from the open windows. I groaned. Thought she'd gone.
She was in a soundproofed guest room last night, Vance explained. We might need her help anyway.
Hope not. What's the plan?
I sent the transcription of the text to someone I trust.
He led the way to a room I'd only been in a couple of times, where the mages kept their computers. Most technology hadn't fared well after the invasion, and I kept forgetting Vance even had computers here. It made sense that the mages had hoarded everything they could. You could buy most technology second-hand, but the quality was variable, and expensive even then. Someone you trust?
Yes,
said Vance, taking a seat in front of the monitor.
Searching all our books would take too long, and I'm certain that particular text isn't in use by anyone else at this time. I'd recognize it if it was.
I pulled up a chair, my gaze lingering on the dusty monitors and keyboards. I'd had easy access to a computer for the first 13 years of my life, but after 3 years living in a medieval-style castle, which didn't even have electricity, I'd never quite fit into the world I'd come back to. Internet signals crapped out on us often enough,
that I'd never become dependent on the not-so-World Wide Web as a source of information. I wouldn't even know where to start looking for a translator for a code nobody knew about. But if the fairies had been involved, most of them hated technology anyway. "Who's our lead?" I asked curiously.
"An old friend from university. It's where one of our biggest libraries is,"
Vance said.
"I spent a few years at the college, so I know the staff there."
Huh. I didn't know. I hadn't even finished school, let alone gained whatever counted for academic qualifications these days. When the modern world fell, most universities had closed down after all the local council's funding went towards repairing the damage the fairies had left in their wake. The majors had claimed the college as their own and turned it into an institute of magical research. Vance leaned forward and frowned at the screen.
"So it's true," he said. "The bullets are definitely the same as the ones the League used. They're made to cause maximum damage and specifically designed to target supernaturals. Bear in mind, it was much easier to hide what we are before the invasion. We show our power intentionally in the open now. That means they have little cause to employ their old methods to track us down."
"Yeah, I didn't have a clue any of you existed before the invasion," I said. "But it seems ridiculous that they actually thought they could kill all supernaturals. There are more of us than there are regular humans."
"That wasn't always the case."
"Still," I shook my head. "The ones who tried it a year ago should know better. How the hell did they plan to cope if the She invaded again? I'm pretty sure you could throw one of those bullets at Theon and it'd bounce off."
"Yes,"
said Vance quietly.
"The She are resilient to almost any attack. If I remember correctly, the bullets were created to pierce through shields and wards, not kill with the first shot. The League wanted to capture supernaturals for their own purposes."
"What? They didn't mean to poison—" I cut off, as the image of Francine's graying, cracked skin flashed through my mind. "It's poisonous to anyone with magic, because they wanted to break through witches' defenses?"
"I believe shifters were the original targets, actually," said Vance. "Witches and mages were adept at hiding their nature before the invasion. Shifters were not. They're more resilient than regular humans when transformed, but the bullets can certainly do a great deal of harm to a regular human. As for the text..." He opened a new window on the computer. "Yes?" I leaned forward eagerly. "This is no fairy language," said Vance. "The code is adapted from the language of the glyphs that witches embed into their spells."
I gaped a little. I'd seen the glyphs, of course, whenever I used a tracking spell, or when I watched Isabel work. I hadn't known they had meaning which could easily be translated. Vance leaned back to let me see the screen. Words leaped out, and my throat went dry. "Watch your back, fairy killer." My heart sank through the floor. Calder said that. Shit. He couldn't be alive somehow, right? Frank said he'd escorted him through the gates himself, which meant someone was using his words against me.
"A number of people know you by that title," said Vance.
"Yeah. The whole mercenary guild, the half-bloods, and most of the local fae kind, too. Actually, every supernatural in the city had some idea of me by now, even if I'd never met them in person. But none of them would have reason to glamour a message left on the site of a murder committed by someone they'd never associate with. It's not the mercs. They're too divided to form a vigilante group, and half of them are practically illiterate. I guess I can speak to Larson, but he'd say it's none of his business. The mercs are there to get rid of misbehaving supernaturals. They'll only act if the League starts taking away their kills." I sighed. Also, whatever pushed Francine's ghost over the veil isn't the sort of force any mercenary would associate with.
"Yes, I was thinking about that too," said Vance. "We need to consider the possibility there's a necromancer involved. Who was Isabel's friend?"
The guy she's possibly seeing? I doubt she'd give anyone the time of day who might be a villain. You've seen how many wards we have on our flat. Besides, she's even pickier than I am, and that's saying a lot. He half smiled at that.
Perhaps it's worth asking. Colby said there are a lot of disagreements in the guild over leadership. Nothing to imply any defectors, however, and I can't see why any fairies would form an alliance with them.
No. One non-necromancer, however, had control over life and death. Theon. Why would the fairies ally with the League, no matter who they are? I mused aloud, not really expecting an answer.
I don't know, Vance said. But the League as we knew them have gone. Anybody might have taken their name. Their ideas did have a strain of popularity in the old world, amongst people who'd accidentally seen supernaturals and assumed that they were all villains.
Fools, growled a voice. I jumped a foot in the air. I hadn't noticed the piano music had stopped, and Lady Harper had crept into the room behind us. She moved surprisingly stealthily, leaning on her cane to glare at me. Who? Us or the League?
The assassins, of course.
Want to enlighten us? I asked. Don't stand there growling cryptically and expect the rest of us to piece it together. I damn near died this morning, and so did Vance. If nothing else, she'd raised Vance after his family had been killed in the invasion. I hadn't seen a great deal of affection between the two of them. More respect on Vance's part, and tolerance on the old woman's part. Then again, she treated her granddaughter, Wanda, exactly the same.
The League wiped themselves out. If it is them, they are no threat to us.
Whoever's working with them pushed Francine's ghost into Beyond. And they're using bastardized witch runes as their code. Which was a hell of a weird choice of communication tactics for an anti-supernatural group. She grunted.
Like I said, fools. Witch runes can do a lot of damage in the wrong hands. Like amateurs using necromantic equipment to tether a spirit. When you invoke a language that belongs to the ancients, expect to face the consequences.
Tell them that, not me. And who exactly are the ancients? The witches? Vance looked at her too.
Lady Harper, if you know anything that might help us prevent further attacks, I'd invite you to share it with us. I'm a mage, not a witch, but I know this will end badly for them.
I turned back to Vance, pointedly ignoring her. So the message was for me. Assuming I'm the target, why kill Francine? If they wanted to get at Isabel, they'd have attacked her first. Our wards stood no chance.
No,
said Vance, frowning.
I'd guess they intended to remove Francine from leadership and attack Isabel while she was vulnerable. But as to their motives, I'm as much in the dark as you are.
Yeah, I sighed. All right. Isabel will be out soon. It's time to play bodyguard. I entertained myself with ideas of ambushing the attackers while I waited for Isabel outside the hall. They'd certainly draw attention if they wandered out in black clothes in this heat. Admittedly, Vance and I drew a fair bit of attention ourselves. Maybe rushing in all guns blazing wasn't a good idea this time. We needed to catch the assassins, but they moved wicked fast at the first provocation. Hey. Isabel walked out of the hall, looking red-eyed and drawn. I hugged her, because she probably needed it. God, it's warm out here. Did you find anything? Yeah, I said. Kind of. It's definitely the same bullets anyway. And the message was written in a version of the runes you use in witch spells. Seriously? Let me have another look at it. I pulled out the crumpled paper and handed it over. Can you read it? Her forehead scrunched up. No. Only a handful of people studied the glyphs. You can make spells work without them. I do know a few of them, but I wouldn't have recognized this if you hadn't told me. Vance knows someone who translated it. I paused. The message said, "Watch your back, Faerie killer." Her eyes went huge. The message was for you. Apparently. It's weird. We went there, not long after they left the message. If they wanted to lure me there, they could have ambushed me easily. I doubted they'd sent the fire imps. Whoever could kill the witch's leader with a single shot wouldn't need to employ Faerie's weakest creatures. I know, said Isabel, biting her lip. Maybe Francine got caught by accident, but from her account, it sounds like they targeted her on purpose. Yeah, I'm not sure we'll get anywhere if we look for motives alone, I said. I was thinking we should sneak up on them, rather than the other way around. Take them down in their own territory.
I would prefer to engage the enemy in a territory of our choosing, Vance said. If we let the enemy lure us into theirs, they have the field advantage.
True, but maybe we can corner them. They can walk on the roof, Isabel said.
So can I, said Vance. They wouldn't have got away from me last time if not for the fairies.
All right. I rolled my eyes at him. You do the catching part. Transport them back to us and we'll take them down. Yeah, but we need to track them first, said Isabel. Tracking spells didn't work. Short of combing the entire town, is there another way? If we knew how to bait them... I paused. I've got an idea. If they're targeting you next, we can set up a safe house and pretend you're staying there while our flat's out of commission. Then we can ambush them. That's a good idea, said Isabel. I think...
You can stay at the manor, said Vance. It will be a simple matter to set up a convincing safe house. Then I can transport you from there into here without the enemy being any the wiser.
Yeah, but I don't want to hide away, said Isabel. I want to be a part of the trap. The enemy can neutralize witch spells. What about mage and fairy magic? Haven't tested it, I said. I'd have thought the mages would be as vulnerable as anyone else. What we need is a good trap that isn't dependent on witch magic. Iron wouldn't work.
You're overthinking it, said Vance. Take magic out of the equation, and there are endless ways to trap them, especially if they're non-supernaturals.
One of them must be a supernatural. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to use the spells they took, I said. Like the deadly bullets weren't enough. We couldn't count on a spell to seal them in, not after they'd nearly shot me in the face through Isabel's trap in our flat. If the way they disappeared off the roof of a 2-story building without a trace was any indication, they were slippery bastards. The hall, said Isabel, indicating the building she'd just left. It has 2 doors. If we lock the back one, they'll only have one way out. We can corner them. Would they really believe you're spending the night in a hall? I asked. Isabel chewed on her lower lip. Maybe. What we need is a way to make them certain they have me cornered.
Did you plan to check what the bullets contain? Asked Vance.
That's our next step, said Isabel. I'm going to see where those ingredients came from. Chapter 8. Isabel took one of the spare meeting rooms at the manor to set up her spells. As more client calls came through, I took the phone and told everyone we were closed for the day. When Vance offered to go and clean up the flat, I went with him to leave an out-of-office sign on the door. If I ever needed proof that our flat wore a sign inviting fairies in, this was it. Dead plants covered the lawn and most of the upstairs corridor. Luckily, business had been pretty good the last few months, and we'd be able to afford the repairs. Unfortunately, I had 7 missed calls from clients today, and no excuses ready. If any clients show up here, we have some explaining to do. I attached the hand-drawn sign to the front door. We'll lose what little credibility we have left if they see the holes in the wall and roof.
Easily taken care of,
said Vance, surveying the flat.
I can fix everything without anyone noticing.
I rolled my eyes at him. What do you do when you find a problem you can't shortcut?
I don't shortcut, said Vance. I merely take advantage of opportunities so I can choose the best use of my time. Unless you'd like to remove that dead fairy from the landing yourself.
You've made your point. I scanned the house. Maybe we should move. Though I think the fairies would find me if I went to Antarctica.
Will Isabel be living with the coven now she's leader?
They don't live in the same house. The coven's pay is notoriously shit anyway, so we'll keep running our business.
I wondered about that. I expected the position of coven leader to come with more benefits.
It's not like being on the Mage Council. It's more of a voluntary position than a full-time job. Well, that's what the local council says anyway. Most witches have other jobs, because the pittance they get from the council goes towards ordering spell ingredients for the whole coven. Which was majorly unfair, but witches rarely inherited huge fortunes like the mages did. Vance frowned.
Doesn't Isabel get paid whenever someone buys her spells?
They're not on the market. Only a witch can use them, and the coven doesn't have the resources for wide distribution. Each coven only gets a certain number of ingredients. Isabel's pretty creative with what she has.
I see. If that's the case, I'll discuss with the Mage Council as to how we can better compensate the local witch covens.
You could always hire Isabel full-time.
Then you'd have to spend even more time around me.
I leaned against his warm shoulder, taking comfort from his closeness. Maybe I want to spend every day with you. He nuzzled the back of my neck, his lips brushing the delicate skin.
Don't jump off any more roofs, Ivy.
Technically, it was a wall. The fairies' plants had knocked several bricks out of place, too. Can you really fix that? You're better at knocking walls down, not rebuilding them.
Are you questioning my talents?
The suggestive note to his voice, coupled with the movement of his lips from my neck to my ear, sent a shiver up my spine. Of course not. I turned and kissed him on the mouth, winding a hand into his hair. I want a holiday from all this crap.
As a matter of fact, I do have a coastal house near the sea.
I drew back to look him in the eyes. I was being figurative, but seriously?
Yes, of course.
That, as well as your house up in the countryside in Scotland, and the place you moved your uncle's family to. Sometimes it still felt like Vance and I lived in separate worlds. The days where I'd barely scraped together rent payment were long behind me, but there was a distinct difference between living in a flat with holes in the ceiling and owning multiple houses.
If you'd like to, we can spend some time there later this summer.
His hands rested on my waist, thumbs circling my hips through the fabric of my jeans.
Once we've dealt with these assassins.
Way to kill the mood, Vance. Actually, making out in the middle of the lawn might be the final straw if the landlord spotted us beside the wreckage of the front wall. We need to see if our little friends left anything behind. I scanned the lawn for stray bullets and found one, picking it up carefully. Pretty lightweight for a killing machine, I muttered, tempted to crush it into powder. But Isabel needed to track down the ingredients. When we'd finished the search, Vance and I went back to the manor and reappeared in front of Lady Harper. Warm air filled the corridor, accompanied by the smell of baking.
Your witch friend insisted on taking over the kitchen,
said Lady Harper, with a disapproving sniff. That's what Isabel does in a crisis, I said. Bakes cookies and makes tea. Excellent. I went to the kitchen, where plates had been stacked on every surface. Those are for the coven meeting, she told me, without turning around. And the summit on the solstice night. A peace offering, I suggested, stealing a cookie. They'll love you for this. Only if I catch the killer, too. Did you have any luck with those ingredients? I asked through a mouthful of cinnamon. Yes. She balanced 2 plates on each arm and moved them to the table. Problem is, someone stole all our tracking spells. I plan to go back home to get some more, but considering the state of things...
No more fairies came to your flat,
said Vance.
You might be able to go back tonight, but I wouldn't advise it.
I stole another cookie, and so did Vance. I've told clients we're closed for maintenance, I said to Isabel. Not sure if I want to work upstairs now I know there are skin-sucking death fairies waiting to get through the wards. I picked up one of the bullets, though. I already checked the others, Isabel said. All of them contained the same ingredients as the last one. I'm assuming the assassins must have bought them legally, and I know every witch apothecary in town. I've got people combing through records of sales in the last few weeks. I wish I'd looked sooner. Good. Vance shot me an amused look.
What do you know? I told her to stay here, and she did. If it had been you, you'd have climbed out the window and come back covered in blood by now.
Don't get used to it, I said. Besides, she's scheming. That's another thing Isabel does while baking, right? You make me sound like a supervillain, said Isabel. Yes, I'm scheming. I may be able to track the individual ingredients to the place the bullets were made. If so, chances are the trail might lead back to wherever these assassins are based. Good thinking, I said. So you think this scheme definitely started in the last few weeks? Must have. She placed the last cookie tray on the table. The phone rang again. I sighed. You know what? Maybe we'll let